indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Can we go ahead and have roll call, please?
Commissioner Gutierrez.
Present.
Commissioner Bergman is absent tonight. Commissioner Marsters.
Present.
Vice Chair Silverman. Present. Chair Harper Pedersen.
Present. Okay. Now we have public comment. Public comment is limited to items not on the posted agenda. And I see one speaker card here for public comment. Are there any others? Okay. Ben, would you like to come on up?
First of all, I'm really looking forward to seeing all you guys finally get your chance to talk. I know you're thinking about this stuff really deeply, so thank you. I wanted to bring up, we were contacted by NBC 11, a news organization regarding an accounting fraud scandal that's occurring with a partner that the city is considering doing business with, Samtrans. And we did a little research, and we've uncovered a transaction through our public records requests of a $4.4 million land transfer related to the San Carlos Transit Village. This land transfer occurred in 2007, and as we all know, this same piece of land was eminent domained in the 90s and paid for with public money, and we'd like to get an answer as to whether, it looks from our research, but we can never be sure, and we'd like to get an answer. Did public money, when the land was transferred inter-organizationally in 2005 from the Joint Powers Board to Samtrans, was public money spent twice? So because of all these allegations of accounting fraud that NBC 11 has sort of brought out, and $300,000 in miscoded transactions that have been identified and admitted to by Samtrans, now we're very concerned about, was that $4.4 million paid for twice? So did the city, did the public pay once for that land, and then did they pay again? And was it refinanced an additional $4.4 million? That's a very large issue. We have been talking about this. So that's our first thing. Our second thing we just want to talk about is there's a garbage issue on Old County Road. This is something that just doesn't seem to get addressed. We have been working with a gentleman in the city of San Carlos by the name of Lou Duran. He's been trying to address it, but we just can't seem to get the garbage stopped from being blown off the Caltrain tracks into our neighborhood. So we really want to just get that cleaned up as part of a larger thing. Don't have to relate it to this project, but just how do we clean up that area? Lou has told me that they were going to go through all the landscaping and pick out the cigarette butts, and I think they might have done it once, but they just come back, almost faster than we can fix. And Samtrans and the city were kind enough to put a couple garbage cans in there at the station, and it's helpful. We don't think the locations are perfect, but we'd really like to find a way to put garbage cans next to the stairwells. And what's happening is people are walking up that ramp, and then they're just whipping their cigarettes and plastic and newspapers off the side, and then no one picks through that stuff. And so that's where we live every day. We have to walk by that every day, and we just want to find a way, one way or another, to get that addressed. And I'm not saying to tie it into this project, because we're not talking about that now, but somehow we'd like to just find a way to live in a cleaner environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Quick question to Al or Lisa. Are these questions, I know since they're not on the agenda, but are these questions that staff can answer for us at another time?
With regard to the trash, I can tell you that city staff met with Samtrans staff, and in fact, attachment 12 of your staff report details the meeting that we had and what the city agreed to do and what Samtrans agreed to do with regard to the trash cleanup. And everybody's trying to do a better job, and we, I think, acknowledge that there were some issues, and I think a better job could be done with regard to trash. And so the city and Samtrans are working together and trying to make improvements there. And Public Works Department may have some other information to share on that at a later date, and we can always continue to try and improve. one other thing to recognize over there is that, it is in a highly traveled area. It's at a transit center. You've got food businesses and a market there, and so you're going to get, it's an area that you're going to get a lot more trash generated from offsite, and wind conditions, what they are, and rain. So it's a hard place to maintain. It's not that easy, but we're trying to do a better job. I think both organizations are, and we recognize that there's trash issues there. So on the other issue, I really don't have any comment on the first issue.
Thank you. Okay, what I'd like to do now is go ahead and move on to the approval of the minutes from September 16th. Do any of the commissioners have any changes or additions to the September 16th minutes?
I haven't seen September 16th minutes.
They were sent to us via email from Lori.
I did not get them.
Oh, okay.
And I actually looked online for them too.
Huh.
They weren't online as of the middle of this afternoon. So maybe we can, I don't know, if you guys have reviewed them and the public has had access to them, then I'll just abstain, but otherwise we can just table it to the next meeting and approve them at the next meeting.
Actually, table it too. I didn't get them either.
You didn't get them either?
Okay.
Okay, well then,
The only thing that I will say about them is that there's a blank space on page 5 that says Commissioner Silberman motioned to close the public hearing. Commissioner, and then there's a blank line, seconded the motion. I was the one who seconded the motion.
yeah, staff had mentioned that we may have been a little quiet on the seconds and the motions last time, so I'll be sure to repeat them
Not a problem.
this time so that staff can hear that appropriately. All right, well, if two of you haven't had the minutes, and because it seems to be an important issue, are we okay to table the minutes? Okay, so we'll go ahead and table approval of the minutes then.
I'll move to.
Do we have to
I don't think we need to do anything.
We don't
Let's
need to
bring it
motion
back-
that, do
bring
we?
it back next time, right?
Right, that's what I thought.
Although, through the chair, now I'm kind of worried about what we should have and we shouldn't have, because I'm actually, there's an email from Dimitri Vandalos on here on the table that I hadn't seen before right now, and I'm looking at it.
It's timed at 5:30 today.
Okay.
Yeah,
that-
it
I
just
didn't-
arrived.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that I have everything that we're supposed to have. I got 3 emails from Lori. One had the letter from the Sierra Club, and then I got 2 emails from 2 citizens who were in favor of the project. Those are the only 3 things I've gotten. Is there anything else?
There was a third email that we got.
If it, for the benefit of the commissioners and the members of the public, I can go through the additional communications we received since the agenda packet was sent out.
Thank you.
There's a letter from the Sierra Club dated September 25th.
And I'm sorry, when you say the agenda packet, do you mean the agenda packet for the 16th, or you?
No, for the 30th, which was the agenda and the minutes, basically.
Madam Chair, if I could just interrupt for one moment. I've been asked to have the commissioners speak into the microphones so that you can be heard.
It's just me.
clearly.
It's just me.
Thank you.
It's me, and I blame Scott Marsters because he's taking up too much space.
I'll take responsibility for you not being
Okay.
heard.
So the agenda packet was basically the agenda and the minutes, and I just was going to go through the communications
Okay, thank
that
you.
we received. There was a letter dated September 25th from the Sierra Club, an email from Jeff Grace dated Monday, today, one from R. Corzabone, pardon me if I'm massacring it, again, also dated today. Communication from Brian Fitzpatrick regarding the shuttle bus analysis, and the communication from Demetrius Vandalos.
There was more than that.
There was an additional
Kevin
email
Clay
from
sent-
Kevin Clay.
Kevin Clay sent an email too.
Well, we didn't.
City staff never got it.
So
We got it.
those are the ones we receive, and if one of you, if you take a break, if one of you would like to share that, we'll make sure it gets into the public record as well.
Sure.
Great. Thank you. Okay, well, in that case, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the public hearing. And let's see. As you guys know, this is actually an item that's been continued from our September 16th meeting, and we heard the staff and developer presentations at that meeting, as well as public comment, which we did close at that meeting. We are at the point now where the commissioners are going to be asking questions and deliberating. What I'd like to do first is to address some of the questions and the issues that were raised during public comment, and then after we've answered some of those questions and issues, move on to the commissioner questions and comments. If this is okay with the commissioners, what I'd like to do is to have each commissioner go through about 2 to 3 question items and then move on to a different commissioner, just so that we're keeping things moving forward. I also want to make something clear. I want to make sure that the commissioners feel that they've been fully heard before any decision has been made. And I think that's really important. However, I also would love there to be some progress towards a resolution, whatever resolution that is, whether that is a denial, whether that is an approval, whether that is a denial with modification. But as long as we are making some progress toward the goal of making a decision, I certainly have no intention on stifling any of the commissioners' comments or questions. So I just wanted to make that clear and make sure that you guys know that. In my ideal world, this would be done in 2 meetings, but that isn't up to me. If we're not there, we're not there, and that's okay too. Like I said, ideally, as long as we're making some progress and moving forward, that is what would make me happiest. Okay? So at this point, I have some questions that I would like to ask for staff or whoever the appropriate entity would be to answer that were raised during public comment. And commissioners, feel free to jump in on this as well, but there's a few of them that I have in mind. Okay. First question is actually one that Ben raised, and I wanted to kind of make it clear, really for the benefit of the new commissioner who isn't here. But Ben had said something during public comment, and he had asked a question. He had asked, I believe the exact words were, are we a toothless entity, or probably more to the point, what is our role in deciding the next phase of this project? And I guess I just wanted to say how I understood it, and then you guys could correct me. I understand that as planning commissioners, we are making recommendations of, like I said, either approval, denial, or approval with modifications to the city council. And from what I understand, we have it's within our purview to make any recommendations or modifications at all, as long as it has a nexus with the project. Am I right in my interpretation of our role?
Yeah, basically, you're correct. I'd add something to the analysis of nexus because there's a case, the Topanga Canyon case, that's the seminal case on tying the findings factually to any conditions of approval that you're going to apply. And in making the findings, you need to tie the facts to the finding that you're making. So in the general sense, nexus, I think, includes that analysis. Nexus also includes conditions that you may want to attach to a project, and that's the Nolan-Dolan line of cases that talks about when you are, there has to be not only a nexus between the project and the condition you're going to attach, but there also has to be proportionality or rough proportionality between the condition. And what you're doing in those cases is tying the impacts of the project to the condition. And the background of, and maybe I'm going beyond your question, but basically what you're trying to do when you're making the findings is tie the evidence in the record to the findings that you need to make. There is a limitation on the conditions based upon the Nolan-Dolan nexus and rough proportionality analysis.
Okay.
So that's the basic, the thumbnail sketch of what you're doing. You are a recommending body to the city council in this case, so what you're, the ordinance amendment that you're considering and is primarily the thing that you're recommending on. I think you do have, I think you do consider the use permit independently, but that's something that's appealable to the city council.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh,
If I could just, there is not a separate use permit because the plan development does include the ability to set uses. There is a section within the plan development that specifies the uses that will be allowed within the district, within the plan development. So you are recommending on the uses. There are use permits that, in response to that, for example, if somebody wanted to have a nightclub, that would be something that would be subject to a separate conditional permit.
I see.
It's Appendix D in the plan development.
they're also doing ARC review, right? Is that in it?
Thank you. And then just a quick follow-up question to that, Greg. So if there are, if during our conversation up here, we are considering items or things come up that do not have an appropriate nexus to the project, could we put that in some sort of, I don't know, cloud or
We call it a bucket list.
bucket list to be able to address in a different agendized item at some future meeting?
Yes, you could do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Next question. There was something raised during public comment asking, or there was a statement made that no landscaping for the railroad berm is proposed south of Holly, and I don't think that's true, is it? Or did I misread the landscaping?
You're correct. There is, in the condition, it talks about that the focus, again, where most of the comments have been and what it's in, the additional landscaping is primarily intended to address is views, the screening to the north. But it's not limited to that, and certainly it's the entire side of the project. So that's something that we don't know where they're going to be. If there's people in the neighborhood who want to look at street trees, that will be something that we would probably sort out in conjunction with the design review,
Okay.
the design, or the architectural permit when it comes back, and we're looking at it in more detail. So yes, landscaping, those 70 trees can be planted, and if you give me a minute, I can give you the exact condition so you can check the wording.
Great, thank you. Next question. Well, one of the comments was that there is a homeless encampment behind CVS, and this would be a good alignment for a bike path. Am I correct in assuming that that does not have nexus with this project, but that's something that we can bring up at another time?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. The next question I have is related to, I guess, the FIA. One of the comments was is that the FIA doesn't provide information about the differences between property taxes based on condos and rentals versus long-term lease and fee title the property. And I guess my question is, does Samtrans pay property taxes on this parcel? And if so, do we see any of that? And if that's not a question we can answer now, that's okay. But
I can respond to that.
Okay.
Public agencies don't pay property taxes
Right.
to each other
Right.
for land that's used for their public purposes.
Right.
Once this land is no longer held by them and basically
lease.
we don't yet know whether it's not going to be used for Samtran purposes. Once it becomes this private use, private development, then it will be subject to tax. And the report, I mean, all the information that we
Right.
had about the lease agreement and everything else was shared
In the
with
FIA.
the consultants who prepared that analysis.
Okay.
So their analysis about the revenue stream that would come to the city from if this project was constructed is fully informed by the lease condition and all of that. So yes, we don't typically see
Right.
charitable organizations and so forth. But if those kinds of agencies are no longer using the land for their primary purpose, then it comes into a different category and can be taxed. It's my understanding.
Yeah, let me just clarify that.
Thank you.
In this particular context, we have a long-term lease. The county assessor is going to assess the value of that long-term lease plus the improvements on the property and establish a property tax rate based upon those values. So the underlying land being fully encumbered by the lease, it's going to be a very similar value to fee ownership with this long-term lease relationship. So in other words, they're going to look at the income stream of the apartments. They're going to look at the improvements and the value of that long-term lease.
And if I could draw your attention to the attachment to the resolution, returning to the earlier question about the landscaping along the berm, if you would look at condition B14, it's on the bottom of page 10, which talks about the developer shall plant and maintain these new trees. The area shall extend, starting in the third line, along the eastern perimeter of the project, starting from the north end of the mixed-use portion of the project all the way to Building 8. So wherever there's buildings being constructed is the targeted area for the tree planting. So it's attachment.
I see it. Does everybody else see that?
It's under number 14.
14.
landscaping
14 at the
land.
bottom of page 10.
Okay.
So again, if there needs to be some, if you don't think that this is clear enough, we can, and you want to respond to that concern, but I think it's pretty clear that wherever those buildings are is where the planting's supposed to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I
Yes,
ask,
please.
ask a clarification about this since we're right here?
Yeah.
What happens after 5 years?
It would be the city's responsibility to maintain it.
Both on the east and west side of the berm?
Not on the west side. That will be part of the project site. This is between Old County Road and the tracks. The condition would require that that area be planted, irrigated, and maintained for 5 years to make sure those trees are well established. It would then become the city's responsibility. Within the footprint of the mixed-use project, that landscaping has to be maintained as part of the project. So there's no time limit on how long the planting that is.
But that's not what this says. What this says is the developer shall plant, maintain, and provide irrigation for the new trees on the east and west sides of the berm slope immediately to the west of Old County Road for a period of 5 years.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. That Al's saying, yes, there would be planting outside of the project footprint on both the east and west side, depending on the things we've talked about, the protection of sight lines for signal and those sorts of things. But once that 5-year period ended, it would be the city's responsibility, as it has been up until now.
Can we add that in here? Because after
Yes.
the way it reads, after 5 years, nobody's responsible for it.
But we can certainly add in language that
And-
clarifies that
yeah.
after that it would become the city's
And
responsibility.
I have a concern with that because in the original agreement, the Samtrans was going to landscape or keep weed-free the property along the berm until the project was going to be put forward. And for 12 years, we've had nothing but weeds there. And so at some point, there was this question about the city took over responsibility for it, but the city didn't seem to think that they took over responsibility for it, and eventually nobody did anything about it. So I want to make sure that, when we're dealing with a lot of these things, that there's absolute clarity as to who is responsible for these things. Okay, and it doesn't matter to me whether it's the trash, whether it's the trees. I want somebody to be responsible for it, and if the city's going to take responsibility for it, then I need to know that the city is going to continue to irrigate those plants, okay, for the life of the project. Okay, so the city is taking on responsibility for all of those trees for 94 years. I just want to make sure that that's perfectly clear. And if those trees die, they're going to be replaced.
If you would look onto page 11, on number C, basically says, I mean, the wording can be refined to better reflect, but it does say that the developer is responsible. After 5 years, the city of San Carlos shall take responsibility. On page 11?
I see it. Under C.
Under C.
Yeah. Is that something you'd like to see clearer at some point, Scott, or you want to mull that over?
I just... Here's the problem that I have. The problem that I have is that in 5 years, the city takes over responsibility for the trees. What happens is the city takes on that type of responsibility the same way it took on the responsibility of maintaining the landscape on the flat between El Camino and the berm, and nothing gets done. So that's what I'm talking about when I mean absolute clarity. I want to make sure that that truly means that the city is actually going to take responsibility for these trees, and that the trees will be maintained in a state that they were originally intended to be, and not through some sort of odd reading of the language say that our responsibility is just to make sure that the trees are there.
Right. I mean, I think it's clear, but I see your point. You certainly don't want it falling through.
I don't want it
some
falling
sort of
through the cracks.
Right.
I mean, for 12 years, we've dealt with the landscaping between El Camino and the berm falling through the tracks. And I hate to keep bringing this up, but that's the type of clarity that I want out of this project.
Well, at this point, do you want to think about maybe some language that would make you feel better about the clarity and the for that? And then
I guess the other question I have out of this is, why 5 years?
Oh, that's a good question.
5 years is a time period in which those trees could be well established. I think you may recall when we were on the walk with the landscape architect, he talked about the fact that first period of time, getting them well started with a healthy structure, that first period is fairly critical for the health of the tree long term. So that's why the 5-year period. The developer would fund that and would be responsible for that. Once they've been well established, then they don't need as much care, and the care isn't as sensitive as it is in that first 5-year period.
Except that, and unfortunately I was not on that walk.
Well, that's right.
Yeah. But everything I've heard is that the trees don't reach maturity until 10 years. And so when I look at this, I look at 5 years and I go, we're only halfway there. So why don't we extend that out to 10 years?
That certainly can be part of your recommendation.
Could we do it for 99 years if we wanted to?
You can certainly make that recommendation.
All right.
Is there a reason that the city is taking over responsibility for the trees? I mean, it seems like it's a condition of the project, and yet the city is volunteering to take over responsibility of something that it's not necessarily responsible for. It's not even on city property.
At the time that the grade separation project went forward, there were a series of agreements, and the landscaping in that area was important to the city, and so the agreement was that the city would be responsible for maintaining it. That's sort of the history of why it was coming back to the city.
Through the chair,
Yes.
just some clarification, historical background, and on this condition. On page 10, paragraph 14 of the conditions, this might satisfy one of Commissioner Marster's concerns, is that there's going to be an agreement that will have conditions A through F that will be recorded, so it'll become part of the public record referencing this project. So it's definitely going to be something that's going to be written down and not easy to be forgotten.
I'm sorry, can you say, what, are we still looking at appendix, or?
Yeah, 14.
The same
Great.
place you were talking
Okay.
about.
14A.
Perfect, great.
So if you look at the bottom of page 10, the agreement shall be recorded and include the following provisions. So A through F are going to be part of an agreement that's going to be recorded. The second issue about the time for the 5 years for the trees, we have an agreement with the JPB from the original grade separation that talks about maintenance of the landscaping. So this language, the 5 years comes out of that agreement. And remember, what you're considering is a CUP. I'm sorry, a development, a PD zoning, and other reviews with the developer as an applicant. So there's a limitation on what you could require of the developer on someone else's land. So I think what we're trying to struggle with is that same nexus argument that, okay, this project comes in, and what's a reasonable condition? Now, 10 years, yeah, that might still be reasonable. 99 years, you might be saying, well, wait a minute, you're telling someone else to maintain some landscaping on someone else's property. So
that brings up another question. Is there a reason that we don't have an agreement with the JPB for these particular trees?
well, I was referring to the existing agreement that we have for landscaping.
Yep. I'm just saying that we're going to plant another 70 trees at least north of Holly. And one of my suggestions is to plant even more south of Holly. And so one of the things I would suggest is that we get an agreement with the JPB for these trees and some other things eventually down the road here that we will discuss. I see there's no reason why. I've seen what happened the first 10 years of the trees that are along the berm. And, you know, those were supposed to be irrigated and taken care of. And then the city was supposed to take over. And if the same thing happens to these trees in the next 10 years, there's going to be a lot of unhappy people.
You know, I think you're perfectly within your purview to try and set a reasonable time for maintenance of the trees, and I think the time frame that it's going to take for based upon the evidence from the arborist to get the trees established, I think is the time frame you're talking about.
And could we require the JPB to be responsible for those trees for that length of time, or the developer?
Well, the JPB, can you have the developer maintain the trees for what period of time? For the whole life of the project, or for some period of time?
We already have it for some period of time.
Right. So the developer would take care of them for some period of time, and then it would be JPB's responsibility. It just seems to me that the cost of this is being shifted to the city.
Again, if we go back to the city of Belmont and San Carlos said, we want grade separation.
Yes.
That was something that JPB didn't need, that, something that was important to the local community. And so we had the grade separation and the berm and the landscaping. In the context of that, the negotiations was that the maintenance of that landscaping, which is not essential to the functioning of the Caltrain, would be the responsibility of the city. So that's where it goes back to. I'm not sure on why that, again, on what, when you think about the nexus and the other sorts of things, why should another public agency be responsible for that?
Because it's on their property.
Well,
There's already a
actually, I was going to
pre-existing
say that the
agreement.
purpose of these trees is to mitigate the effects
Of the
of the development. And that's the only reason. We're not asking them to put the trees in to make the berm look better. We're asking them to put the trees in to provide a buffer between the project and the community. And if not for the project, we wouldn't need the trees. So, I mean, that would be the argument on the nexus. And so that's why I guess I don't understand why there would be a time limit that wouldn't be tied to the existence of the project. I guess I could use some help on that.
I think the issue is the same issue that I talked about briefly before. We need to have tie the condition to both the impacts of the project and is it proportional to the impacts of the project. Maintenance of the trees, we haven't quantified what that would cost, and then we have the overlay of the existing agreement with the JPB, which does allow the city to maintain the trees on their property. So I think that's where this condition came from. Is we have an agreement, the city has permission to go on the JPB's property to maintain the trees. In this case, the JPB's not here. The JPB's not an applicant for this project, so we don't have the ability really it's no different than conditioning planting trees somewhere else in the city. We don't have they're not here today.
Right, but I
The
think
developer's here today.
Oh, no, I was never suggesting that I was going to ask the Joint Powers Board to fund maintaining the trees.
I misunderstood where
No,
you were
I'm
going.
sorry. That I obviously was not articulate. I was just saying that we've got a developer. We're putting in these trees because of the development. Why couldn't we require the developer to pay for the maintenance of the trees for the life of the project? I mean, because the nexus is the trees are right next to the project. The trees are mitigation for the project. I mean, everything we've talked about, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, the trees we're talking about are the trees that were creating the mythical sound barrier, not actually buffering the sound, but making people think that they're buffering the sound. I mean, that is one of the purposes of the trees. And so if that's the purpose, I mean, that's the nexus, right? And so I still am not understanding why we can't require the development to maintain the trees for the life of the project, unless, I mean, as you're saying, if the project is going to only earn $100 million and maintaining the trees is going to cost $101 million, well, then I guess that probably wouldn't be proportionate. But I'm guessing that the cost of maintaining the trees is not that large.
It may or may not be. That's not been something that I've heard reviewed in the documentation about what the cost would be to maintain it for the life of the project. So that might be a question that staff or that someone might have an answer to, but I don't see that in the materials that we've got. And I think the main point I'm struggling with, just to be clear, is that the trees to be maintained or the cost to maintain it is on another entity's property, and it's not on the development parcel that you've had before you. So it's sort of like what we've seen in the Planning Commission before. We do not add conditions of a single-family residence to plant trees on other people's property. It's not something we do, and it's. And I don't have the cases in front of me, but there are cases that talk about that you're requiring something, improvement of somebody else's property.
Right?
I appreciate that. The problem is, and again, I mean, I don't want to suggest for a second that we're having an interesting discussion. The reason why they can't plant the trees on their own property is because of the way the project is designed. And so, it's been designed in a way where you can only fit a certain number of trees on the property. This other property, you're not saying that they don't have authority to go on the property, do you?
They don't currently.
The other option here is to shrink the size of the project so that they can fit the trees on their property. Okay?
That's an option that's under consideration in your deliberations.
Right. And so this is an alternative to shrinking the size of the project, is to allow them to plant trees on the berm.
But the condition does allow it. What we're talking about is
It's the maintenance.
the maintenance of the trees past the 5 years. Am I?
Right.
I'm missing something there.
No.
Yeah. So
I guess we have all kinds of maintenance issues in the city. Streets being maintained, sidewalks being maintained, all of those kinds of things. If the Joint Powers Board doesn't maintain it, we'd have to go to court to force them to maintain it. If the city doesn't maintain it and it's their responsibility, that's what citizens do. They come and they talk about priority setting, they raise issues, potholes, trees, conditions of parks, trash, all of those kinds of things. It's part of the ongoing part of governing the city. So I'm not sure you can if you went ahead and made the Joint Powers Board responsible for it, it's not.
No one's
No,
suggesting
just let
that.
me finish. You still have the issue of whether or not they're going to do it. If you do it with the developer, you still have the issue of if you went ahead and recommended and made it be a responsibility of the developer and then they didn't do it, you'd have to come to the city and get the city to enforce that condition.
I think the question really is the time, the length of time.
Right.
Obviously we're putting this as a condition that it's a 5-year mark. So what prevents it from being a 50-year mark?
It's already a condition
It's already
on the developer.
Right,
is what
and
Jesse
again,
meant. Sorry, I didn't mean to put words.
the nexus or the relationship is to make sure that the trees are well established. And again, that was a 5-year period. 10 years till they reach maturity? Certainly.
Except that
50-year, 99 years, life of the project. As you go out farther, it becomes harder to make the issue of proportionality and nexus. But, that's your decision to make a recommendation. My point is that ultimately the city, whoever you put on the end of the line saying you're responsible, if it doesn't happen, it's going to come back to the city, either to do it if they're responsible or pursue remedies to have other entities like the developer, like the Joint Powers, like Samtrans, whoever you want to put in that role, you're going to come back to the city to seek enforcement.
So my question is, what you're saying is that it's better to force it back onto the citizens, okay, to be the enforcer and to go after the city, than it is to put it back on the city to be the enforcer to another agency or the developer.
I'm saying it doesn't matter who you put at the end of that line. Yeah, that's the reality. When you have potholes, we don't have enough resources in the public sector to do all of everything, and so we have a capital improvement program where we talk about how we're going to maintain things. It's not the intention of the city not to maintain that, but if there are problems, yes, that is part of the role of participating in a city, is you put your hand up and say, excuse me.
So you just gave me the reason why it shouldn't be the city, okay? Because the city has limited resources.
Okay.
And what you're doing is you're adding one more additional responsibility onto the city rather than putting it onto the developer who is actually proposing the project.
And if the developer doesn't do it, how does it get enforced? You're going to come to the city and
It's going
say,
to come to the city. But
it's
now
not
this-
being done, and then the city would have to go through its remedies.
Exactly, but it doesn't force it back onto the average citizen. It becomes the
Doesn't
responsibility
default
of
it
the city.
basically back on. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Instead of Ben having to call up the city and say, there's a dead tree, it's been sitting there for 91 days. The city now takes on that responsibility of being the one who goes out and says, the tree's been dead for 91 days. The developer, you need to replace it.
Well, again, my point is simply that the city has a role, and I can't think of any way to guarantee that Ben won't have to say the tree's been dead for 91 days, who's going to take care of it?
I'd like to,
You
at
know.
this point, bring this back just a little bit. It has been very interesting, and I think that these are all important points. What I'm gathering from this conversation is that we indeed can increase the number of years that the developer is responsible for the trees. However, it does seem that if we go over a recommended number of years, that we may have a problem legally with making a nexus to the project. So, which doesn't necessarily need to, influence our decision, but that is something that staff is telling us. So I guess at this point, for this particular issue, what I'd like to do is once we come to recommending conditions or changing conditions, that we add a different number.
Okay, I want to throw in a few more things while we're
On this thing?
right on this
Okay,
right here
let's do
right
it.
now. Okay, just this little small section right
Okay.
here. Yeah. Okay, so they're going to plant, maintain, and provide irrigation for 5 years. Does that mean in 5 years and 1 month, if the tree dies, is the city going to plant a new tree?
I'm sorry, where
Or
are
is
you,
the
Scott?
developer going to plant a new tree?
It would be the city's responsibility.
City.
The way it's
So
written.
the city's willing to take on the responsibility after 5 years of replacing any of those plants along there that die.
Scott, just this on this line of questions, I mean, we can't bind the city to do anything, right? I mean, we can bind the developer to do things potentially for a period of time, but if we say 20 years, 20 years in 1 day, everything dies, there's a tree holocaust, and everything dies, and the city doesn't want to plant more trees, the fact that we said that it was the city's responsibility in here doesn't mean the city has to do anything, right? I mean, we're not binding the city. We're just binding the developer.
That's a good point. We are the city. This
Right.
planning commission is part of the city.
Yeah.
And the decision on how much money to spend and everything is going to be a future city's council's decision. It ultimately is going to be a priorities issue. But I think the city's, imperfect as it is from historical basis as far as maintaining some of the trees that are there, I think the record's being made clear tonight that the trees are important, and that's as much as the planning commission can recommend, I think.
So essentially, the maintenance agreement doesn't really mean anything.
I didn't say that. What I'm saying is that the maintenance agreement, as I understand it, gives the city permission to go on to the JPB's property and maintain the properties. Maintain the landscaping and the trees. I don't think there's other provisions in it.
You essentially said that if the city takes over responsibility and they decide not to do it, a future council decides not to maintain those trees, that
Yep, but
That's
I know, but
saying
we're-
it's a priority based on budget.
But we're talking about two different issues here. One is the agreement and the city's obligation for maintenance and how that's going to be paid at some point in the future. It could be the distant future, versus what's a reasonable nexus based
Right.
upon evidence in the record that you can say that the maintenance of the trees are related to the project. Beyond a certain date, they might not be any longer. It could be a big storm knocks them down, and we could have lots of hypotheticals of how the trees, what something could happen to the trees in the future. Plant holocaust, I like that one, but but it's going to be, that's kind of what you're grappling with. It has to be reasonable and proportionate.
And again, I think cities and I think the councils work hard, as does the planning commission, to do the best for the community. But I can't think of a mechanism that gives you an ironclad guarantee that from now until that project goes away, the trees are going to be maintained and no one will ever have to put their hand up and say anything. We have use permits, and people sometimes have to raise complaints about people not being in compliance. We have businesses that don't operate. I mean, citizens are part of, there's not just some other people who take care of everything. And,
Yeah, no, I think-
and that's, I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
I think what he's getting at was minimizing the risk of the city. And that's pretty much, I think, what this whole discussion's about, really. You know,
I would suggest that we increase that time from 5 years.
Right.
so when we get to that point, I've got it flagged, so
Yeah, okay.
It's on the notes.
let's move along.
We
Still
can-
within this section.
Okay, so we will increase the time, got it, on
we'll-
maintenance and
Yes.
on
Yep.
planting. Okay, I'm making my notes.
The other thing that, why is the tree planting completed within 24 months of the issue of the first building permit? For me, I would rather see it before occupancy of the buildings.
Again, these are all things you can do. The thinking is that they're going to start building at one end. They're not going to be building all 8 buildings simultaneously,
Right.
in all likelihood. So we could either say, plant the piece that's next to the buildings as you go along, or this condition says, once you start, the trees have to be put in within 24 months. Not
These are
Not
just
in-
the trees along the berm.
correct. It's only this tree planting condition that has to be done within 24 months of when they start the first building, even if they don't build the last building for 10 years.
And why 2 years from the time of that start building? Can we shrink that down to 12 months? Can we shrink it down to 6 months?
Again, yes, you could make a different choice.
I think you could do that. I'm looking at the language, and there is some discretion of the director that the time could be extended if the timing of an individual building is not ready, for instance. So if you wanted it to be 24 months, and then you were comfortable with giving the director the discretion so that he or she would be able to say, oh, look, the trees aren't ready at this spot because the building's not completed yet. But only give an extension until the building is completed. And then that could be at different phases. That might give you the flexibility and the ability to have the planning start as early as possible.
And that's why I was sort of talking about before occupancy of the buildings versus sort of, building 1 could go up in a year and be in place for a full year, and building 2 also before the trees are planted. And for me, and I think I would feel better knowing that the trees were in place before people were living in the buildings.
And Madam Chair, I think one other consideration would be the electrification project, and there is some concern that, if you put in some trees and irrigate them, and then the electrification project comes through, you got to tear them out. So I think maybe there could be an earlier date, but there could be some consideration of, if there's another construction project that gets in the way of the trees or could damage the trees, that there be some consideration for that as well, and timing of that.
So we would put language in
Oh, yeah.
for that.
Oh, yeah. Electrification is going to, don't be thinking that we've forgotten electrification.
Yeah.
Okay. Scott, are you good on this part?
I think that's all I have at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I have just a couple more questions based from public comment, and then, and again, if you guys want to chime in, these are just questions that were raised during public comment that I have additional questions on. Actually, before I ask this question, could you put the project up on the screen at some point? The reason I'm asking is that the question is about traffic and circulation, and it'll be helpful to see the project up. Thank you.
It's not. No, there's no project included in this presentation. You'd have to go to the ones that were put up by the developer. There were. Okay. Well.
Any particular slide that you were interested in?
I wish I knew. Well, my question is about the driveways for building 1 through 4. This was a question raised from a member of the public, whether they'd be turning left onto El Camino. So I guess whichever slide would. I just kind of want a visual while I'm asking. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Al. So that would be my question. And forgive me if whoever is appropriate to answer it, please feel free to come up and answer. But will there be left turns from the driveways for Building 1 and 4?
From
onto El Camino, or will they
southbound
be
El Camino Real, there will be left turns into each of the driveways.
into each of the driveways?
Right.
Okay, how about coming from the driveways?
No?
Oh, yeah, please, come
Okay.
on up.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've got 2 minutes. No.
Oh, this is an answer to a question.
And it started a
Yes.
minute and a half ago. So
Question about left-bound here.
Yeah.
Both ways, and the driveways coming, when the drivers come out of their driveways to exit the buildings.
Hauling to this point here, which is north of this last driveway, is at this point, Caltrans is a continuous median. So there would be no left turns out of these onto El Camino. All of this traffic coming onto El Camino off of the site goes northbound.
Okay, so they all will be turning right from their driveways.
Similarly, south of Holly,
Okay.
it's- in the residential area, there is a continuous median, there's no movement that allows us to
Okay.
come across and turn left on the company.
So basically, the median doesn't change at all.
Remains continuous.
Continuous median. Thank you.
Can I also ask a question at the same time? Jeff,
Yeah, go ahead.
do you know if there is a U-turn at Oak Street, or does everybody there have to go up to Hull in order to make a U-turn?
There is a U-turn at Oak.
That is not something I'm specifically knowledgeable about.
There is a U-turn, I'm pretty sure.
There is a U-turn at Hull, at Oak Street,
Well,
or is it at Hull?
let me ask you this. If this is Oak Street, the answer is yes. You can
Okay.
make a U-turn.
Yeah, that's Oak
Take a
Street.
U-turn, and they can do that right there. Island is thicker here. There's your turn lane. Allows them to do that.
Okay.
If that's Oak Street. The answer is yes.
I've seen 3 accidents there, so there is definitely a U-turn there.
Yeah. Okay.
well done.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Okay, and then my final question that was raised in conjunction with the public comment is about the bicycle travel routes, not necessarily on the project, but around the project. And my question is, how would someone who lives in Building 1 get to the train station? So anybody that can answer that for me on their bike, how would somebody who lives in Building 1 take their bike to the station?
El Camino Real is a path for bicycles. I mean, that is the city's and the county's master plan for the bike path. So we've assumed that, yes, you can get on that bike path. You cut across at Oak Street, just like we just talked about, and you'd be on the official bike travel way along El Camino Real.
Because you're not supposed to go down you're not supposed to ride down against traffic on El Camino. So you actually have to cross
That's on
over
any
at Oak Street.
That's on any street. I mean, you're supposed to go with traffic on a bicycle.
Right.
They would not use Old County?
But they couldn't cross the berm.
Right, okay, thank you.
There's also the continuous emergency vehicle access that would allow someone to ride on something that's away from traffic, behind the buildings, all the way down to Holly. Then they would have to come out and cross to do that. But there was a
That area is set up for the fire department to be able to use.
Okay.
Bicyclists could use it as well.
So they would come, from Building 1, they would come through the emergency vehicle access, cross down on Holly to cut across to El Camino, to continue to go south, then go back to the train.
correct.
Okay.
I mean, there's well, yeah, or they could
Go down and
underneath, go on to Old County Road. So I mean, there's several
I see. Okay.
several ways that they could get there.
Because otherwise, they'd actually have to cross Holly Street in order to be going with traffic,
Got it.
going south.
Okay, Thank you. And those were,
One more point about that.
yes.
When they cross underneath to use Old County Road, they would actually have to cross to the other side of Old County Road because there is no sidewalk in place that would actually, that is on the west side of that intersection. So there is no crosswalk along the west side of Holly and Old County Road.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
But they don't need the, you're right, they don't need the,
Okay. Okay, those are all my questions from the public comment questions. I just wanted to make sure that those were addressed and answered.
Madam
Okay.
Chairman, if I could just to maybe clarify a little bit about the East Side Connect project. After it's complete, we will have continuous bike lanes kind of from the north end to the south end of the city along Old County Road, so that if someone on their bike from Building 1 took the fire access road over and then went on Holly Street underneath to Old County Road, they could turn right and head south in a bike lane along Old County Road. They could also utilize the signal there and go either direction on Old County Road to access the bike lanes that are going to be in place by the time the East Side Connect project is complete.
so when they take the fire access road, is there an exit from that fire access road along the south side of the project here?
There's not. You'd have to come to the front of the project. You'd have to cross using essentially that pedestrian signal at Holly and El Camino, and then enter the bike lane and go underneath Holly and turn on Old County Road.
But is there a way to get, so do they need to come out driveway number 1 there? Or can they go all the way down to Holly Street? Is there a path that goes where those trees are along Holly Street to get them out to the intersection?
That's a developer can answer that question better than I.
Okay.
The grade is too severe. You're never going to be able to.
Okay,
It's going to be a 20% grade or something ridiculous.
okay. So they have to come out.
Holly's an undercrossing. I mean, it's,
Right.
it's a depression.
Right.
They've got
I-
to come
I
out in
just-
front of between buildings 1 and 2.
Right, but those trees there are at grade.
The trees are on a slope. They're not great, but that's a slope there. It's a slope
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
It'll continue to be a slope.
Okay. I just wondered if there's a path in between the trees and the building that they could.
It's a steep slope right
It's
there.
a steep, okay.
It's sloping down towards Holly.
Yeah.
Holly's going, the property's flat and Holly's dipping down
Okay.
under.
Okay.
So they'd come out through the driveway would be,
Then they'd have to go against traffic to get down to Holly Street.
Sidewalk.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
They're going to ride.
Thank you, everybody. Fair point. Okay, those were all my questions that I just wanted reiterated from the public comment from the last meeting. Did any of the other commissioners did I miss anything, guys, that public comment specifically brought up at the last meeting? And if I didn't miss anything, what I'd like to do at this point is to go ahead and move on to some commissioner questions and comments. We can organize this any way you guys want. We can go topic by topic and just kind of chime in from there, or we can move on commissioner by commissioner. So I will leave that to you, but
Want to just start?
yeah, you want to get started?
Yeah, I just have actually. I want to have a question for Samtrans, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Actually, a couple questions actually. First question is where are we on this on the multimodal station transit center kind of construction? I mean, where are we in the whole planning stage?
So for the multimodal center, as you know, the multimodal center was cleared environmentally at the same time this project was cleared by this council. So that's occurred. We've hired a design team that is now taking the design that was approved there and taking that design out to fruition. We're at about 35% design, and we're moving forward with addressing a number of questions. I think the two next things that we need to do are have a meeting with your Public Works Director to talk about some city interface issues. And then secondly, in the near future, we're going to be talking to Caltrans about, the interface with El Camino Real. And then the goal is, and we're in a little bit of a tricky position here, quite honestly, because what we want to do is we want to get design completed and have this project ready to go so that the transit center is moved before the development starts constructing. At the same time, we want to make sure that before we get too far along with the design that there is going to be a development project, because the two go hand in hand. So we're in the middle of that process right now.
And how long does that process usually take? I mean, once you have a design set aside, construction would begin approximately?
Again, our goal is going to be to put a big effort into finalizing design after this project is completed, because we don't want to spend a ton of design money for something that's not going to be built. My guess would be that our goal will be to have this constructed before Legacy is ready to go. So our goal would be to have something constructed in about 18 months or so.
Okay, because that was actually what I was getting at, because I noticed that as one of the conditions, they can't build 5, 6, 7, and 8 until the transit center parking is done.
Exactly. And again, let me explain a little bit better is what we want to make sure that we do, that we have an opportunity to do, is to get all the comments that this commission and that the city council has incorporated into the transit center design. So there's certain periods where we have to hold design to let the process at the city catch up to make sure that we're incorporating the comments of the city into that design. At the same time, we want to make sure that this project is constructed before Legacy is ready to go. So it's a little bit of a different than a normal process where you just start designing and go straight to the end.
Yeah.
Right now, we're in kind of a little holding pattern to wait for the city's comments to catch up, because we don't have something designed and then have it not reflect where the city is. So, but we will, if all goes according to plan, have this ready to go when Legacy is ready to go.
Okay. Second kind of question. Shuttles on the west side. I read the email, didn't quite understand it, to be honest with you. And maybe it'd be easier to see if we have a slide of that, on how a west side shuttle drop off would work.
Sure. If somebody could help me out here, I can. Maybe is there a little pointer, Al?
Yeah, we need to invest in a good pointer. Maybe the developer can buy us a pointer.
Is there Nexus?
There's probably not a Nexus for that one. I'll say.
You to rent us a pointer.
Okay, so I think I can explain this fairly easily. So if you look at Cherry Street, which is going to be the new entrance to the new multimodal transit center, as opposed to the parking lot like we talked last time, this is going to have set out areas for very specific things, as opposed to that parking lot now that has 226 parking lot spots and really nothing else. This is going to be a full-blown transit center. So if you look at the Cherry Street entrance, you come in, you turn left, that is heading north, correct? The end of that is a park and ride area where people are going to come up and drop people off. Right now, that's not in the current plans. Okay, you see 1, 2 bus spots right there at the very bottom, right on El Camino Real. Mm-hmm. Okay, we have been able to redo the design since this point in our design process, and we're now able to get 1, 2, 3 spots along that area. Okay. Now, right now in the current design, the plan has always been that this station is meant to complement existing patterns, meaning that it'll complement the shuttles dropping off on the east side. Some actually come to the west side. It's designed to work in that same manner. So with those 3 buses, we need spots for 3 buses in that area. So right now it's designed this way. If it turns out that shuttles are unable to serve the east side because the city decides that they want to prohibit shuttles from serving the cutout that will be created in the East Side Connect project, what will need to happen is we'll need to get 3 more shuttle spaces into this area north of Cherry. what that effectively it means that we need to bring shuttles over there, and then we need to figure out a way that buses can continue to serve this area. So that means we need to bring in 3 more spaces in here. When you bring 3 more spaces in, you effectively take this from the directly parallel, perpendicular, if you will, parking. You shift it to an angle parking situation. What that means is you lose about 21 spots. Now, we're not totally tight on that, and I sent an email out yesterday to our designer, and I said, we need the most spots we can possibly get in this northern area while getting 3 more shuttle spots in there. But the preliminary, and I think pretty close to final, is going to be we're going to lose about 21 spots in that northern area. So that's going to be one of the impacts you're going to run into. Now, the other impacts that are addressed in the memo and that we've tried to address can be summarized pretty quickly. And what they basically are is the shuttles run a certain route. They go pick up people at their work, come back to the station, pick up people there, take them back to their work, and the reverse at the other times. Right now, there's a certain number of shuttles that can serve each one of those routes. In other words, a certain number of buses can serve those routes. We add about a 7-minute time penalty to come down Holly, come up El Camino, and in Cherry. One of the impacts of that is that now instead of one bus being able to, meet up with a certain number of trains, it may take 2 because, the trains come at certain times. The shuttle buses have a certain amount of time their route takes. Adding a simple 7 minutes to it may mean that now one bus can't meet up with all those trains. You might need 2 buses to meet up with all those trains. So you've got a potential impact of cost there. The other issue that could come into play is that these shuttles are funded by a combination of employer funds, grant funds from different agencies, typically air control, air management agencies, and by the San Mateo County Transportation Authority. One of the other potential factors is now by having 2 buses do what one bus might be able to do, when the San Carlos route is compared against other routes and the efficiency is looked at, the score for San Carlos will drop because it's less efficient, meaning you'll be less competitive for funds. So generally what the memo tells you is probably riders aren't going to be that sensitive to an extra couple 7 minutes. You may not lose riders. You may increase budget for the 2 reasons I explained, and you certainly will have the infrastructure impact on the transit center that we talked about. Last time we talked a little bit about trade-offs. Everybody wants to be right where that park and ride is. We get 21 less cars there and more shuttles there if we flip the shuttles to the other side.
What's to the south of the entrance to Cherry?
To the south of the entrance to Cherry is more parking, car parking. And then there will also be, in some areas down there, we'll do some bus staging.
Yeah, I thought
we talked last time about how sometimes we stop buses in a bunch of parking spots. In this center, there'll be bus staging areas that will be not impactful of the number of parking spots. They'll be dedicated for that. The difference between staging and loading and unloading is loading and unloading needs to be strategically placed where it's convenient for the bus patrons. Staging is basically where you sit between bus runs to make up time or to have scheduled break times for the operators. Those buses don't need to be in a strategic location. They just need to be able to park somewhere.
Can I ask a quick question here? So I know you're getting federal funds for the multimodal station.
Correct.
How much are you getting in federal funds?
It's about $3.5 million.
Okay, so about $3.5 million. And you're having trouble with 3 shuttles.
What's that?
And you're having trouble with 3 shuttles.
Correct.
Okay, that just with $3.5 million, essentially for a parking lot and a place to put some shuttles, it just seems that somehow we ought to be able to solve this problem.
I don't think, with all due respect, it's a question of. I don't think, with all due respect, it's a question of money. I think it's a question of physics and space. You've got a long, skinny area. You're trying to put a lot of things into that area, and trade-offs occur. Right. And it's our job, I think, or really your job and the council's job, to assess the various trade-offs and determine what is what. And what we're trying to do is make sure that you have that information before you to make those accurate determinations.
because to me this gets into a whole. There are pieces of this that are not just about the shuttle.
About the multimodal stations?
About the multimodal station, about building 8, about the parking spaces. They're all interconnected. If you
You're talking about the design of it, or
I'm talking about the fact that the 21 spaces there are serving building 8. Okay, and so let me see if I can go back here a little bit and
You
think
mean the
about it.
21 spaces that would be lost would be serving building 8?
Would be serving building
Okay.
8. Okay, and so this gets into the fact that you're trying to put as much as you can in building 8. Okay, because the developer has 3 floors, 3 stories, and so all of a sudden those 21 parking spaces become necessary in order to park building 8. Okay? And so that's interconnected with building 8. Okay? The other thing that they're trying to do here is there is no loading dock for building 8. Okay? One of the waivers, if you actually look in here, is to actually, there is no loading dock for building 8 because they don't have any room for it. And so the plan, according to what's in here, is to double park the trucks out on Old County Road and cart the goods in underneath the station over to Building 8 because they're trying to put so much in Building 8 that they don't have the space for.
I see Jeff wanting to say a couple things, or Jess.
Hold on.
It's in the development thing, the piece here, where it talks about vehicles parking out on.
Has always been that. I was going to show. I got to bring my own pointer. Our plan for building it. You see where the kiss and ride is the parking lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So here's the kiss and ride, and the loading area for the building is in this area here. So our plan is, these trucks are much smaller than the size of the buses that will be coming in this area. There's no reason they can't go in there as well, and they're not. It's typically off hours when these things are happening anyway. So we have plenty of large truck spaces, whether it be in this area here or people backing into this spot temporarily while stuff gets unloaded. It has never been. And we've never even discussed and never been asked, are you parking on El Camino Real? Because we are not, are on Old County Road, and then carting them back here. That has never been discussed.
Read page 21 of the staff report. On-site loading spaces. The section requires loading spaces for new buildings with retail and restaurant uses. Based on the table, 2 loading spaces 10 feet long and 10 feet wide, 25 feet long, And then down here, it goes, when larger delivery trucks are necessary, they could be accommodated along Old County Road, which has ramps up to the level of buildings 7 and 8. Okay? So it's in the staff development, the staff plan, that these trucks will park out on Old County Road, use the ramps underneath.
Well, I guess I'll stand corrected, but that's certainly never been our intent, and I don't know if that got put in there to mitigate some potential problem that somebody saw from the city's perspective.
It's because you've asked for the waiver for
There's nothing on here that told me that was how you intended to solve.
I mean, that wasn't part of what we submitted in our plans.
So, then one of the things is we could certainly look at that. And again,
We'll look at eliminating that, I think is the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've talked with the Public Works Director, and the shuttle area can serve also as a truck loading area. And again, most of the trucks, so many of them now are not much bigger, are basically a UPS truck or a FedEx truck, which could use the parking lot that's between buildings 6 and 7.
You're talking. Yeah,
Okay, well.
I understand it's not your intention, but that's the way staff is is looking at it, okay? Are you talking about the shuttle area on the east side or the shuttle area on the west side?
I'm talking about, first of all, many of the delivery vehicles would be small and could use the parking lot between buildings 6 and 7. Could pull in there
There is, oh, okay.
between 6 and 7,
6 and
pull in
7.
there
I see that.
and unload. If there needs to be a bigger truck, semi-trailer, then based on my discussions with Jay Walter, that the shuttle area could also be a truck loading area.
You mean the kiss
On
and
the
cry
east side.
area?
On the east side.
On the east
Oh.
side. See, we're not talking about a
We're not
shuttle
talking about
area.
the
We're
same
talking
thing.
the shuttle
Okay.
area on the east side is now going to be an offloading area in addition to the shuttles. And wait till we get to talking about the east side
But again,
The-
this is new information,
Yeah.
and if they have a better way of dealing with it, then providing an area in here, loading area,
Yeah.
then we can also modify that.
We'll have access to more asphalt than we ever need. Unloading on our side of the
But there is no-
property. We don't
there-
have too many people who are going to volunteer for hauling stuff on a hand truck
There's-
as far as that would entail, up and down stairs and ramps.
but you're asking for a waiver for 2 loading docks.
Yeah, but our waiver could be handled in the parking lots that are being built as part of the project. They don't have to, the waiver doesn't have to occur on Old County Road.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, this
That's
could be
what-
a condition of project approval that the Planning Commission adds as part of the PD, that loading and unloading of these kinds of vehicles shall only occur in this area and will not occur anywhere else. So, and it seems like a viable solution. It's new to city staff, but it seems like a very viable solution. We could take a little closer look at it with Samtrans and.
I don't think there's a whole lot of, the retail here or a restaurant or the office above it, a whole lot of locations anywhere on the peninsula of this size that then has their own loading docks.
That doesn't have their own loading docks?
Yes,
It does.
that does.
That does.
That does.
So
have their own
you're
loading docks.
essentially saying an
We're talking
area-
about a loading dock where a truck backs up. I mean, where does that occur? Anywhere
In more
on Laurel
industrial,
Street, for
yeah.
example, where you have all those restaurants.
Now, again, a loading space does not have to be, you'll back in and.
He's
it
saying
just-
loading dock, though. That's what I'm.
Right.
That's what I'm.
Well, it has to be an off-street loading space, and it's dimensioned.
We have lots of
But
loading
you're-
spaces
But you're
available.
asking for the waiver of the two the 2 loading spaces.
Spaces, not docks.
Okay, we'll call them spaces.
Right.
Okay, but you're asking for a waiver of those 2 spaces.
That's correct.
Okay.
So,
Um,
but you're just saying now, Jess, that you can accommodate them to the east
Well-
of Building 8.
Loading can occur east of Building 8 in the asphalt that's there. They're not. It's not going to be dedicated spaces that only get used at 6 o'clock in the morning when the delivery truck shows up and then never gets used again.
So
it's a shared use.
There'll be no space. There'll be no loading or unloading. Is that a condition that you're willing to live with? Loading between 6 and 8 in the morning?
No.
No, you can't deliveries.
No.
won't-
Well, why should we? We've got all that asphalt there.
But you're asking for a waiver of those spaces.
I understand that.
Okay? So you're not going to have anything close to the building.
That's pretty close, closer than Old County would be.
So you're going to be using the kiss and ride here and the shuttle area as a loading and unloading area also.
Well, I'm not sure we've discussed the shuttle area, but there is still plenty of asphalt there, yes. It's not like a truck's there all day long.
So,
For example,
can you,
For example, you can only see the beginning of it. Here is what Brian described as a
Staging.
layover. So
Okay.
those only occur occasionally. So that space may not be for one exclusive purpose, and there are several of those. So those are places where a delivery truck can stop, part its delivery there, and we certainly don't mind a condition that says we are not permitted to do any loading or unloading on the Old County roadside, because we're absolutely confident that we have all this asphalt, that we can work that
Through the
out.
chair, we're not picking up, I'm sure, on the microphone, people walking back and forth
Right.
to the screen.
I
So
apologize.
whenever somebody comes up, go speak in the microphone and use the mouse. It'll make
Yes.
our record clear.
So just to clarify, then, we can go ahead and make a condition of approval that says there will be, you are not permitted to load or unload on Old County, and that would solve this particular
And again,
issue.
if what I'm hearing from the Legacy team is they believe that loading could occur to the east of Building 8, so could also add a condition that says they shall design a space that meets the loading requirements. It doesn't have to be exclusively loading, but it needs to curb cut, and it needs to be designed to take truck weight in terms of the plaza area, and it needs to be appropriately dimensioned in terms of the width, height, and clearance. So if you can put one in there, then that you'll have one space that it has to be, I believe it's 12 feet by 25 feet by 14 feet clearance.
I'm sure we have that area somewhere
Okay.
on the property.
Well, somewhere in
And
the
you and I had
vicinity
talked
of-
about between buildings 5 and 6 in that area at one point.
For smaller,
6 and 7, there's nothing between, there's no space
I'm
between.
sorry, 6 and 7.
Yeah.
And we can do the same between buildings 8 and the parking, or in the parking somewhere. I mean, we've got,
Okay,
there's
so.
several acres of asphalt there.
So we could add a
Right.
condition if that's what the commission would like to do, that says this is how loading. It's not going to be on Old County Road. The loading will occur in the vicinity, either within the parking lot or as looking at it through design review as part of within the hardscape around Building 8.
I think that makes the most sense, and does that
Yeah,
answer your?
I mean,
solution?
the problem I had is that on the east side, you're putting shuttles and unloading. So
in agreement.
I think that, putting that over here and finding a location for that. I'd like to see where that location is going to be.
And we can do that in design.
And I think that if there's a potential for both one there and the one between building 6 and 7, then you don't need the waiver for the 2 loading spaces.
Okay. Really quickly, I don't know that we finished Jesse's actual questions on Samtrans, so I want to make sure that we get back to that. I do understand
just
it's
kind of a quick
interconnected,
follow-up.
but I want to make sure we
This
get
design has
all this
2
out.
buses. Did you say you had a design that was able to squeeze 3 in
Yeah,
without
imagine,
changing the angles?
imagine if you took the 3 buses, you'll see there's a quasi sawtooth or articulated design there. We just make it flatten the whole thing out, and you can just fit 3 buses in that same general area.
And then I forgot what the staging area could accommodate 2 or 3 buses as well.
So yeah, let me show you. So we'll have 1, 2, 3 along this area, and then it's likely. And again, we're still finalizing these designs. Literally, emails are going back and forth today, asking questions of our designers. There'll probably be 1, 2, 3 along here. These spots will go from the perpendicular to the angled, reducing the number. And then one of the things we're going to try to do here, just imagine back there, we're going to have a couple of bus staging areas. They could be here, they could be further back. The goal that I've asked the designer to look at is get us the number of bus layover staging areas that we need, but minimize the loss of parking in the lot. So in other words, maximize the number of parking spots while maintaining the number of bus staging areas. So that's the direction they've been given. We haven't got an answer to that yet, but that's the direction they're given.
Okay, great. That's it. Thanks.
Right.
David, did you have any questions on Samtrans multimodal station in particular?
None.
Okay.
So I just want to ask the other commissioners, how do you feel about moving the shuttles to the west?
Well, why don't we go through? I think we were trying to get through at least a couple questions each, and then
Okay.
maybe do another round robin and start kind of summarizing the stuff.
Sure.
Okay.
All right, Jesse, we're still on you.
I'm good for right now.
You're good?
I'm going to
Okay.
save a couple more.
Okay. Scott, I'll reserve that question because I do think that that's an important sticking point that we'll want to make a determination on. Right.
There's a reason why I asked all those questions.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. David, what about your list O questions?
Right now I was just going to focus on asking some questions relating to the Sierra Club letter. And I don't know that this really matters, but I think that actually I may be a member of the Loma Prieta chapter of the Sierra Club. When I say I may, I don't know. My wife, I believe, is a member of the Loma Prieta chapter of the Sierra Club, and I think that may mean I'm a member as well. I assume that doesn't matter, but I
Thanks
figured
for the disclosure.
I figured I'd disclose it.
I get their emails. Does that count?
No, they send out a lot of emails. So I guess I can go through a couple of them. One is the issue of the 15% below market units. My understanding is that if the developer elects to pay the in lieu of fee, there's nothing we can do about that, right?
That's a choice the developer can make as part of their application.
And we could try and guilt them into doing something else, but we have no power over them. Is that right?
That's the way our ordinance reads, so you've got to follow the ordinance.
So there are some questions that the Sierra Club asked in question one that I think are really, I'd be interested in knowing the answers, but I don't need to know the answers to make a decision on this project. So if at some point the staff could look at those questions, it's on page 1 of the letter, item 1, talking about how many below market rent units can be built with that amount, and where does the city plan on putting them, and that sort of thing. I'm interested in knowing the answers to those questions, and maybe at a subsequent meeting the staff can report out on answers to those. But I don't think that the answers really can affect my decision, frankly. I would also be interested in knowing whether the staff has a response to the issue that the Sierra Club raised regarding the zoning code and unbundled parking. The Sierra Club's view is that there needs to be unbundled parking under the zoning code, and that this project doesn't provide for unbundled parking. So, if staff is prepared to respond, it sounds like we're not going to get done today. So, at any point, if staff just wants to punt it to the next meeting, I'm fine with that.
Unbundled parking is an option.
Okay.
Under the ordinance. It requires a minor use permit, and if it's approved, then the ordinance sets out some conditions for requiring it. That certainly can be something that you recommend. You could say, we want it to be unbundled. One of the things we thought about is there's a lot of concern about the commuter parking lot, and if we're charging for parking, no one's going to use it, and they're going to go park in the neighborhoods to the east. Now we're talking about giving people a choice of whether or not they're going to pay rent and parking, and they might just pay rent and then go park in the neighborhood. So in thinking about all of those sorts of things, I think there's also an issue of marketability. But again, you could say, okay, I'm making numbers up. It's $1,000 for the apartment and $100 a month for the space, and some people might choose not to do that and go to the additional effort of parking off-site. So that's certainly something that you could recommend, and I know that is a concern of the Sierra Club and something that they have consistently pursued, which is to make the cost of parking and the cost of owning a car more transparent, more obvious, and saying, here's your rent for your apartment, here's the rent for your parking space is one of the ways they've identified as doing that. It is not a requirement under our code. There is a provision to allow it if a developer wanted to seek that.
So basically, I think that I'm assuming what Sierra Club was doing is it looked at the language that says the following rules shall apply, and then it says all off-street spaces shall be leased or sold separately from the rental or purchase fees, and that language is not as mandatory as it seems.
It says a minor use permit is required, so you have to start there. So you apply if Legacy had said, gee, we want to unbundle parking, they would have come in and they would have applied for a minor use permit.
Okay.
If it was granted, then these are the standard conditions or the standard requirements for the unbundling unless the director identifies them as infeasible.
Okay.
I mean, that's the way in discussions with city staff, I understand how this section.
And staff in this particular instance has determined that unbundled parking is not a good idea because of the spillover issue?
Well, that's one of the things. It's also not something that Legacy requested. But again, it's something that if you felt that, if that's something you wanted to ask staff to go back and require as part of the PD, we could
Where's
do
this?
that.
What's the city's view right now on the permit parking situation on the east side? When we had last talked about it during the EIR process, it sounded like what we were doing was requiring a funding mechanism for the permit program, but it wasn't something that was necessarily anticipated to happen because I wasn't actually sure that folks wanted it. But then in reading the materials and preparation for this hearing, I got the impression that maybe the city was leaning towards having a permit parking program. What's the city's view on that right now?
The city's view in the staff report in the conditions, what we're saying is it's really up to the neighborhood. And there is a funding mechanism required if the neighborhood decides to have that. I know at community meetings with the greater East San Carlos neighborhood, as just a question, hey, are people in the room generally in support of permit parking? A lot of people rose their hands and said, yeah, we would like it. What we're saying is that if a neighborhood wants to do it, they have to vote 50% of the block or the neighborhood plus one. And if that's the case, then it will be applied. The permits will be free to the residents, and it will be paid for by the developer. So there is a condition, and we can probably cite the condition that says that.
Can I comment about that? The condition in there only requires the developer to pay $10,000 to come up with a permit parking plan. There's no condition that the developer will end up paying for that permit parking. So that really needs to be addressed.
And the way that the city approached that is from a law enforcement standpoint, there would be some revenue generated by tickets and things of people who violated the terms of the hours on the street. And so after its initial rollout, eventually these things pay for themselves. And that's really what you're looking at is traffic enforcement, is the giving tickets out and getting the revenues from that. So that's how we approached it with this model.
Does anyone have any thoughts on unbundled parking?
I do.
Are you negative towards it or positive towards it, or?
I'm positive towards it, but I think that there's a compromise. And I think that the Sierra Club is looking for unbundled parking, and my suggestion would be that each unit come with one parking space, and that any parking spaces beyond the one car actually become unbundled. So instead of having every single, essentially, no matter what size the unit is, you would be required to have one parking space that's attached to that unit. And then anything beyond that would be unbundled.
Not a bad suggestion.
And the idea for that came from the fact that, and I know you're on this right now, but another Sierra Club concern, and that is that they're the TDM. And I really share that concern that the TDM is just doesn't meet the standards. I mean, I don't think it's going to actually.
You don't feel it's that?
I don't feel it's going to make 20% difference in the trips. And so what I would like to see is that the money that comes from the unbundled parking actually go into a fund that's used to buy Samtrans and Caltrain passes for the residents of the residential units.
Okay. Well, I'd be interested if the developer has a strong feeling about unbundled parking. I'd love to hear about it. If not, I mean, please don't feel obligated. I will observe that I don't need you to respond to the idea of moving the money to train passes, because if I want you to move money to train passes, I'll just tell you to do more train passes. You can do whatever you want with your money. But yeah.
Well, I share staff's concern about unbundled parking. For example, the majority of the residential units are to the north. We have a fair amount of street that isn't considered in the project, but we have a considerable amount of street front parking.
On El Camino?
On El Camino. Now, that's a nice flexibility to have, particularly for guests. It's convenient and that sort of thing. And again, it's in excess. We've provided guest parking on site, but it's there. So the minute we provide unbundled parking, you will have a certain number of people who are going to say, I'll save the 20 or 25 or whatever the number of dollars per month that we may arbitrarily say a parking space is worth, and not do that and park there, or migrate even further to save whatever. And the more expensive that parking was to get at some point, the more it'd be that case. I will say, somewhat in Scott's thinking, a way that we sometimes manage these is we'll allocate one parking space per unit initially and allow people to add them. But I would desperately ask that not be a condition, because managing of parking in these kinds of facilities, we do not dedicate spaces to people. They get a parking permit. The parking to work efficiently in these buildings is a shared system. So you have units that are always vacant, you have people that are traveling and those sorts of things. So those folks, to be most efficient with the garage, you do not specifically assign spaces. So you give people a parking permit. And again, that's one of those things that we could say it's unbundled parking. We say, fine, we're going to charge $10 a space for it. It's an accounting nightmare. Somebody's trying to enforce it. It's meaningless.
But your tandem parking would be assigned.
Most likely, but not necessarily exclusive. It just depends on the circumstances. I mean, we're trying to anticipate how parking is going to work and how people are going to use cars over the next 99 years. I assure you, we don't know how that's going to evolve. The same thing, that they've talked about how many electric charging stations. Well, the nice thing about a structure like this is we will have most of our electrical infrastructure down at the level of the parking garage. So as time changes, the market will determine how much electric parking we have. Maybe electric cars become everything. Maybe they become they fizzle out and they become nothing. But our customers will decide how many electric parking spaces we have. We won't be precluded because, again, we'll have the infrastructure in there to do it. And if someday we need, 10% or 20% of the spaces to have charging stations, then we'll be able to adapt to that. But I think that whatever was proposed, I forget what number it is, but I think it may be 10%.
10%.
Something like 28 parking spaces. I mean, that's far beyond what most newer communities have would be. It's a good starting place, and we provide that, and it'll be distributed throughout the complex. So I know I've gone beyond what you asked.
No,
but I'm
I mean, I
trying to address
think
some of those
the
things.
idea underlying this, and it's a theme, is that we want this transit center, if it's built, to be a transit center and to de-incentivize driving and incentivize other things. And if spaces cost money, presumably people are going to. I mean, that's the idea. Now, there may be more effective ways, like this idea of subsidizing rather than subsidizing the number of passes, the 38 transit passes, subsidizing all of the units.
Well,
I mean, what do you think about that?
I don't
it's
think
going to cost money.
I mean, we're talking about spending in today's terms on a pilot program. We don't know what it's going to look like, how expensive. But in the pilot mode, which is usually the most aggressive it's ever going to be in trying to incentivize it and making it cheap, we're talking about $70,000 a year to give everyone in the project a pass. Not everybody who goes there is going to be a regular transit user. I don't know what that percentage is going to be. But when you create transit development, we're not forcing it to be people that live there are only going to be there that use the transit. They're going to be there because they're walking distance to work. They might work at PAMF. Guess what? They're not going to use the transit, but they're not going to create traffic. They're in downtown, they're near the jobs, they're near the activity. The other thing is they're much more likely when they come home to leave their car at home and to walk to downtown and be less car-centric. And I think that and when you get on the peninsula and you look at the demographic they're going to have and what it's going to look like over the next many years, it is going to be less car-centric. Now, and again, on encouraging transit, if you're in downtown San Francisco, and we've developed the first apartment project next to Moscone Center in the early 80s, and owned it up until about 4 years ago, and went through a long evolution of what happened there, and it was very different from the way it was in the early 80s and the early 90s to the way it is now, because there's been an evolution of that area, and there are far fewer people that actually keep cars there. Now, in that location, the city's different. We ultimately went to a mode where parking was a totally separate thing, but that was driven by the marketplace. We had a lot of people who didn't have cars. We're not likely to be that way here. We're not going to have a lot of people in the peninsula that just don't have cars. We may have people who have cars and need a place to park them that use the transit. And that's more likely at this stage on the peninsula. So trying to over-engineer and mandate is dangerous. And we're talking about a project that we are proposing to do things. We do have a transit demand management plan that uses standards that have been established by ABAG with their history and expertise to incentivize that, in addition to the incentive that you've put them in the right place.
How did you come up with the 38 passes? Where did that number come from? Anybody know? Again, if you don't know, you can come back.
It came from, but there's a, for lack of a better word, if you look at the, and I actually got it from city staff, ABAG has a cafeteria plan on how to reduce traffic, and there's choices you can make. It's a laundry list. It's a cafeteria plan of you can do some of this and some of that and all these various things, and we just chose a little bit of each.
Okay, but I'm wondering, was there a formula or something? Again, if you don't know, you can tell me.
No. There's
right here.
there's a trip reduction we have to make.
Okay, so install a transportation kiosk.
No. Yeah, you're
But
not.
they
I'm
get-
sorry.
they-
I
they
appreciate
get-
your attempt to help, but I'm wondering where 38 comes from. Whether it's a calculation.
38 allows for a certain reduction of
38
trips.
here.
38 allows for a reduction in trips, just like all the other choices we did.
Through the chair,
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
it's actually the San Mateo County Congestion Transportation Managing and Planning Agency. They have a requirement that this project has to reduce its trips to less than 100 in the PM peak. We have figures in the traffic study that say what they're projected to generate in the PM peak. And Jess submitted a program looking at here's the various things you can do, here's what we'll credit you for. And he identified the ones he thought would be most practical, most feasible in the setting until he reached a number that said, okay, now I'm complying with the Congestion Management Agency requirement to reduce my PM peak trips. And they have assigned one parking or one transit space or one transit pass is worth one trip reduction. And so he chose to allocate 38 to get to that number.
Look at our PM traffic. I want to say the number was like 188, 182, and we had to get below 100. So we had to come up with 82 credits or 88 credits, whatever the delta is. And so, one of the ways, we'll be honest with you, you could do 88 passes and nothing else, and you would comply.
I see.
Or you could do 60 of this and 30 of another, and you would comply. There's nothing that says you need to do 280 to comply. You were required to reduce below a certain number, and so we've got to pick 88 items that get us there.
We also use some gut instinct of what are things that we think could be effective, and kind of how far do you think it'd be really efficient. You don't want to buy parking passes that people aren't going to use.
Now I understand where it's coming from, and that's suggesting to me that we probably can't ask them to do. And this is rhetorical. I'm never suggesting we were going to require 280, but it sounds like we can't require them to reduce their trips more, or can we?
No, I mean, again, you can look at how they're choosing to do it. Keep in mind that our ordinance has a requirement for reporting, so we would ask them to, they'll be doing surveys they'll be doing 2 surveys a year. That's one of the things they get points for, which is also a way of finding out what might work better for the population working and living there. And that's provide an annual report. And then at 5 years, there's a review, and the community development director has the opportunity to say, these things aren't working, you're not meeting your target, you have to do something else. So that's a sense of the particular mix they're proposing. You could certainly say we want to have them do something different, and you could ask for more. I mean, that
Okay. And part of the idea is by mixing this, we get to test a lot of things, and when we get to that point, if we're not as effective as we thought we would be based on this initial analysis, we've kept some powder dry. If that means at 5 years we look at it and we need to be providing 48 instead of 38, we've got that flexibility, and we would have that mandate on us.
Can I?
Is this a question for Jeff?
This is a comment, okay? I mean, here's the thing. This is a transit-oriented development.
Correct.
It's a transit village, okay? They're trying to just barely meet that 20% TDM, okay? This property is owned by Samtrans, okay? When I look at it, I go, they should be trying to exceed. They should be looking at ways to really encourage people to use transit. After all, if you're not going to encourage people to use transit, don't call it a transit village, okay? I mean, that's what this was supposed to be for, was to get people out of their cars to use the trains, to use the buses. Their sponsoring agency is Samtrans. Caltrain is right next door. I look at it and go, it's an easy sell for us to increase that number. Maybe not to 280, but
I'm just wondering whether we can, like, if we go ahead and say, okay, rather than 38, and I do see it says 42 in one place and
38
in another place, but it doesn't matter. But if we were to say, okay, do 50, well then they're just going to go ahead and reduce something else that they're doing to meet their requirement, right?
Well, the requirement that they're meeting is a requirement that the city generally imposes on projects. So if you want to exceed the standard, the general standard that we've set, you'd have to look at other aspects of the project that would give you the basis to impose the additional condition and to enable you to make the findings.
Wouldn't
I'm sorry.
Wouldn't the fact that it's a transit village be one of those?
You know, that could be, but I think it's
No, I
really
was gonna ask the
I
same
think we're
question.
looking at the substantial evidence in
Same
the record of the
incredulous,
impact
Tom.
of parking that this project on parking or on other traffic, whatever the case may be of this project. There is some other reductions in parking that they're asking for. So, for example, that could possibly be a basis for increasing the other. But we'd want to lay that out so that you had the evidence in the record on that finding.
Right. It would just seem that because this is a transit-oriented development immediately next to the train, that we could hold at least some of the transit stuff to a slightly different standard, but I could be wrong. That would just be my instinct. Certainly reading 38 also seemed a little low to me as well.
and I look at, the proposed TDM program, and I go, okay, they get credit for installing a transportation kiosk. They get credit for actually an employee survey twice a year. They get credit for making roads and streets more pedestrian friendly. There are some things in here that I agree with, but I look at it and think, boy, if we can't hold them to a standard and they are right next to all this public transportation, then we have a real problem with, why we even have a TDM. If the project were 1.5 miles from the train station or bus routes, then I would say, I understand you have a tough time meeting the 20%, but they should exceed that 20% and be proud of it, instead of sort of hiding behind the 20% of the TDM and saying, well, we can sort of meet this.
So I've done my 2.5, I think. So, I mean, I can keep going through the Sierra Club letter if you want, or I can defer however you want to do it.
Well, just one quick follow-up question to something you brought up about the 15% BMR units. And the only reason I wanted to raise this is that I also did notice in the city council discussion that that there was also a lot of discussion about having the units on site. So I just wanted to clarify that indeed would violate our own BMR ordinance to require that, right? So we absolutely cannot require that.
I'm going to look at the, I queued up the actual BMR ordinance in case we got a question like that, so let me unlock my
Take your time,
computer.
Greg, and you can respond when you
Going with the Sierra Club.
May I keep going?
I agree. Go ahead, continue.
Do you want us to wait for you?
No, he can jump in when he's ready.
I've got the page up here.
So the next was the electric car charging stations. You have any concerns about those?
As I said, I don't mind having what I'll call the infrastructure within the buildings that allows us, as the demand requires us, to be able to do it. So to demonstrate that we have the capacity to provide future charging stations at greater levels if the market needs them. But the level we're providing is, like I said, 1 per every 10 units. That's as high a standard as I know of any community that's out there. I know Sunnyvale has recently implemented a similar ordinance that's 1 per 10 spaces, and 1 per 10 units, and it seems like a reasonable standard. But I understand, I wouldn't object to a standard to say that maybe we have the infrastructure in place to prove evidence that we have infrastructure that we could expand that in future if the demand required it.
So if you could do me a favor, assuming we're not going to finish today, which it appears that we're not, could you, for the next meeting, could you come back with a proposal for some charging stations and number? I don't understand what you mean by infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure to me sounds like we can do it if we want to. And
meaning that the electrical capacity, that the building has electrical capacity within the parking structures.
Okay.
Because visualize these parking structures, almost all of the electrical infrastructure works underneath the podium and is hanging in conduit underneath and then transits to the units. Then there's electrical transformers and panels there. So wherever we put these in, we'll be running conduit over, and then we'll actually, in this case, we're actually putting charging stations in.
Oh, how many charging stations are you putting in?
28.
Oh, you are putting in 28.
We're putting in 28.
Okay.
I mean, that's more than adequate. And I assure you that we're going to leave ourselves, it's common sense for us to leave ourselves the capacity that if the market, if affluent renters want more charging stations, we're going to have the ability to expand upon that. Again, the market's going to dictate it, but we'll start with 28.
Okay, awesome. Don't go away just yet. I'm sorry. Please.
I just want to clarify that. So you are putting in 1 charging station for every 10 units.
And I think they're suggesting we double or triple or maybe provide 280.
They're asking for that. They're asking for 1 charging station per 10 units.
Is that the right number? Is that the number we have in there?
And
somebody look and clarify what we have.
28. I'm pretty sure.
No, it's in our whatever is in our condition.
But
I'm just
280 divided by 28.
I believe that's what.
Do that.
If somebody can look in what we worked in, because we made a proposal, and I'm just.
You're on the record of 28 now.
Yeah, whatever. Well, if I'm incorrect.
If you haven't committed to 28, you're committing to 28 right now. Is that fair?
No, that's not fair.
Okay.
This is being recorded, Jeff.
No, whatever it is. Well, what does it say we have proposed? None? We have proposed none. We'll do some. We'll do some. I don't, 28 may be excessive.
Going back to my earlier-
We will, let's put it this way. We will look at it. We will provide electrical outlets that allow us to put in 28 stations, okay?
Okay.
We will put in at least one or
Don't
two.
commit to any right now. Just
But
when you come
something
back.
along the lines of, we will put them in each garage. We will then decide whether to buy these expensive charging units and attach them to them based on the demand.
What I'm asking you now is when you come back at
Bring
the
it.
next meeting, if you could let me know how many actual charging stations you're willing to
Fine.
to commit to.
Fine.
And then, we haven't voted yet. I'm sensing that there's some interest in the commission to have you commit to more than 38 or 42 transit passes. If you guys can maybe come back at the next meeting, and if you don't want to commit to any
We'll see.
more, that's fine. But if you can justify that number with some other methodology other than it was the number that you needed in order to meet your minimum threshold, like if you can come back with some sort of rationale why this is what the demand is going to be.
We're not experts on, that's why we rely on these external, we've relied on experts that have come up with methodologies for transportation demand management. We'll look at it some more, but.
If you don't mind,
but I'm
I
not
think
a
that there's going to be some
guru on
interest I'm thinking there's going to be some interest in the commission in increasing that, and I think that you would benefit by, coming up with a proposal rather than us,
There's- I understand.
Randomly coming up with a number.
There's only so much we can do, but we will look.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And there may be another way to look at it. I mean, I don't know, like the amount, it says, as far as the amount of the subsidy, maybe there's a possibility to do more passes at a lower subsidy.
Well, that's kind of what I'm thinking as well.
Yeah.
I think we've proposed to outright bypasses. I would much rather come up with a methodology where we subsidize passes, because I like the scenario where we give some people some financial assistance
Yeah.
to encourage them, but that they don't just take the pass because it's free.
Absolutely.
I like that
No,
too.
absolutely. That's exactly what I would suggest anyway. So I
Yes.
would love to hear a
Yeah,
proposal
we'd
along
be
those
happy to do
lines.
that.
Going back to the electrical cars, so you will have the infrastructure in the parking garages to, at some point, if electric cars become as popular as I think the Sierra Club hopes, to have an electrical charging station for every unit?
No.
I'm not asking you to provide one, but the
No,
infrastructure.
the answer is no. The answer is no.
there-
We will not. We will not start with an infrastructure to charge 280 cars at one time, the way we know of cars today.
Right.
We would have the infrastructure. I promise, we will come with a proposal that commits to have an infrastructure that would allow us to put 28 charging stations in. We will have some number we will start with day one.
Okay.
And then, but if we've already committed and we've got, the power to the location to do up to 28, and let's say we start with 10. Let's just say that's the number. The market's going to dictate, because if people have, the people that are going to have the electric cars are going to be the more affluent renters, and they're going to drive the demand. And if those things are being fully utilized, we'll add them, because that's a service that our customers are going to want, and but we're not going to do it before we identify the demand.
I'm not saying that you should have the infrastructure to do it, but the capacity to be able to.
No, because we're talking about, again, if you look at today's model, we don't know how electric cars are going to work or how that technology, all we could, you're talking about having an awfully big pipe going in there to do 280 day one. So that's sort of like saying we're just going to pay for 280 transit passes. If we said we'd pay for 280 transit passes, they'd all take them.
Sure.
But they probably won't use them, and there's a balance. So
Understood.
what I'm saying is our proposal is going to be, we will put the infrastructure to do 28 charging stations. I'm sure we'll have capacity to do some more, but again, that technology is going to evolve, because as to electric cars, all this stuff's going to want to be retrofitted into a lot of buildings. We don't know how they're going to solve that problem over time. But if we start with enough capacity, in addition to doing everything else we're doing in here, to have 28 charging station capacity, and that's the way the ordinance, as I remember looking at it in Sunnyvale, it isn't that you pre-wire for it, but you don't actually put any in. In our case, I'm prepared, because we would expect to, in all of our new buildings, we're putting at least some in. It's a good marketing tool. And we hope people use it, and we hope that evolves that way.
I think that's understood.
Okay. So you want me to keep going?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think this is more to staff, and I assume you guys have, I'm sorry, I shouldn't colloquial, you folks, I don't know, have the Sierra Club letter. So I'm now looking at page 2, and I'm skipping to subsection H, and it talks about the design of the pedestrian walkways and crosswalks that the developer is going to improve. And it asks for a condition of approval that requires both the city and Caltrans to approve the final design of the pedestrian crossings before the construction can begin.
We can certainly add the wording. It would be subject to local review and approval as well. We can make that more explicit and add that wording to the condition. That's not.
You don't think we need that?
I think, again, if it answers a question, we should put it in.
Okay.
It was certainly our intention that it would be. I see Caltrans isn't going to go off and do something without working with the city, but we can put it in to make it explicit.
Sure.
It's more important, I think, that we were noting that an entity we don't normally, that doesn't normally deal with we don't normally have to get approval from Caltrans. We would along El Camino Real. It's different than other cities.
No, I just think that this was just trying to make certain that the city and Caltrans, not that the city would seek Caltrans approval. No, just that the developer would have to get approval from the city and Caltrans.
Yes,
before
they
it
would
started
have to,
building.
whether we say that, I mean, whether it's in here, but
Either
we
way.
can put it in, and then it makes people happy, and it's clear that
Okay,
there will be
well,
both local review and Caltrans review.
Sure, I kind of doubt that anyone would have on the commission would have a problem with that. So I would ask you to draft that language, please, for the next meeting.
Before you move on from that,
How could you? Okay.
there's another piece of this in the pedestrian crossings that is a concern, and that is that there is no pedestrian island between Building 4 and Building 5 in the middle of Hawley Street. And that's a very large crossing across very many across a lot of lanes. And so I'd like to see that there be an actual pedestrian island placed in the middle of that area.
Where?
Madam Chair, I'd like to ask
Yes.
if the Public Works Director could respond to that.
Yes, thank you, Jay. Yeah, I believe I asked that a couple meetings ago.
Yes.
Same question.
It's at this point, it's unlikely that we would be able to find the room in that area for a pedestrian island to be placed. The amount of traffic that comes through underneath the railroad tracks and access the intersection at El Camino Real is not going to be reduced. So without some significant modifications to the underpass itself, I don't think we could find the room to have a pedestrian refuge island in the middle of that area.
So how do we make that safer? Because I've walked across that, and there just isn't enough time to get across that crosswalk. And so we're going to have a population of 300-400 people crossing that to get south to the downtown. And what you're telling me is that there's no way to make that safer.
I guess I don't agree with your characterization that it's unsafe. There's a pedestrian phase that folks can press the button, and there would be appropriate timing based on the standards for pedestrian crossing times, which is roughly in the range of say 2.5 to 3 miles per hour, roughly speaking, to get across there. So I think there's good standard timing that can be used to allow for pedestrians to cross there. I don't believe it's unsafe as you're characterizing it. It's a long crossing, but most of the crossings on El Camino are long crossings as well.
But this one is particularly long because of the number of lanes that are there. There's 5 lanes there.
And there probably is a greater crossing distance on El Camino than there is for Hawley at that point.
And there's no way to put a pedestrian island in there.
I think without modifying the structure itself, I don't believe we've got enough room to be able to do that.
Is there a way to modify that island so somebody could stand in the middle if they were incapable of getting across the island, across the street?
there's always a way to install a pedestrian push button in the middle, which is kind of a common feature for wide crossings. The thing that I would worry about, and I guess we'd have to look at how this was designed, but you'd want to provide at least 4 feet for somebody to be in there with any level of comfort to be waiting in the very middle of that.
And that's not, that you don't have enough room for that.
My initial assessment is that there's not enough room, but it's something we could probably have them look at to see if it could be eked out of there.
Can you take a look at that and come back to us at the next meeting and see if that's possible?
We'll go ahead and we'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go on,
So
David.
going on H, and just I'm just going to say right now, one of the other suggestion the Sierra Club made is modifying traffic. Consider something involving modifying traffic on San Carlos Avenue to eliminate traffic or have it go one way on San Carlos Avenue. I think that's a terrible idea, and so I would not do anything with that. If anyone else wants to pursue that, I mean, I'll let you do it. But I think that's a terrible idea, with all due respect. The next, the bicycle improvements, and again, this is for the developer. You don't have to come up to the microphone if you don't want to, but there's a request to increase the bike spaces per unit from 1 to 5 to 1 to 1. 1 to 1 seems excessive to me, but I personally would like to see some more bike spaces per units if it's possible, more than 1 per 5. So if you would be inclined for the next meeting to either come back and tell me why that's a bad idea, and that 1 per 5 is more than enough, or come up with another reason why more is a bad idea, or come up with a proposal to do more than 1 per 5. I would appreciate that. And then finally, on item J, this is also for the developer, but you don't have to come up to the microphone if you don't want. I actually found the discussion of the bike path route between Building 1 and the train station to not necessarily be terribly convincing, but I'm still open to the idea of being convinced. I think the idea to come back with a specific plan for how you're going to get bicycles from 1 to the train station, and if that is just the fire road to Hawley to Old County, that's fine. It kind of felt a little haphazard here at the meeting, like no one had actually thought about it. If you want to come to the microphone. Okay.
I don't know how I go back to that side.
But again, I don't need to put you on the spot. I mean, it does seem we're coming back another day.
I understand, but I'd like to get further with it and see how close we're getting and refine where the questions are and focus on those.
Sure.
Rather than starting from scratch. So, the bicycles are going to be coming out of garages, okay?
Uh-huh.
So if you think about it, in this case, you have this building, and the bicycles are not going to be coming out the front door, but they're going to be coming out of the garage. Okay. So the person at this point has the opportunity to go here, cross over, ride all the way down El Camino. They can turn here. They can come this way. They can go anywhere in town that they want to. Okay? So if they're coming out of that, you also have the option that if you want to go this way, you can go here, and we've got a paved path that goes down to here. Then you come out here. And anybody in the same thing, this is the point that all the bikes in these buildings are coming out of this. This is one big garage here. These bikes are coming out in this location and this location as it is, okay? So they can come right out here. And yes, to get to this side of El Camino, they either ride down here, turn around and come back here, or they walk their bike this short distance right here to that intersection, at which point they transition from pedestrian getting their bike out to driving. Once they're in this location, then they're using the city's infrastructure. They can walk across here, get in the bike lane, and go here and go anywhere that they want to, or they can walk across and continue to walk across.
Here's my concern, and I assume we're not supposed to leave our own experience at the door when we're up here. I ride my bike to work. I've I wrote it when I worked in San Francisco and I took it on the train. So if that's me and I live in that building, yeah, I'm gonna go on that fire road, and then I'm gonna come up that driveway, and then I'm gonna ride on the sidewalk.
And
That's what I'm going to do, and I assume that's probably legal in San Carlos. It's legal in like half the cities to ride on the sidewalk. I don't know if anyone knows. Is it illegal in San Carlos?
It's not legal to ride your bike on the sidewalk.
Is that right? So I would not be doing that. I want to make very clear I would not be riding my bike on the sidewalk. But some people who are less law-abiding than myself will probably be riding on that sidewalk, despite the fact that it's a violation of the ordinance code, which I assume is punishable by a misdemeanor. But people are going to do it anyway. It doesn't seem really safe. There may not be room. If there's some way to come up with some other way that doesn't involve people riding on the sidewalk, that would be awesome.
And I can tell you, all right, we've looked at this a lot.
You have?
We've looked at this a lot. We have this problem, right? Get over here. We've got this problem right here. You come down here, and there's enormous grade separation right here. There's no way to get people down here. You know, as a matter of fact, there's a grade separation, and then there's a small retaining wall when you get down there. So you're going down the slope like this, and then there's a retaining wall, and it's just, you couldn't ever get there. Plus, there are all kinds of utilities happening in these areas, so you couldn't magically change the grade and slope it down and do that, because you've got that happening over here because of all kinds of public infrastructure that exists in this area.
So let me make a ridiculous suggestion that you can tell me is ridiculous, because I know it's ridiculous.
The overpass?
Any chance you can make a tunnel under the berm there in the middle of the building?
$2 or $3 million, I'm sure we could do it.
Is that what it would? All right.
I mean, we've asked these guys, it was asked early on in this process, well, why don't we just punch a bunch of holes in this thing and at $2 or $3 million a piece? And the question is then how do you do that while you have live trains going on something like that? It's just not in the cards until someday somebody decides to redo this berm in a totally different way into some viaduct.
Okay, well, I mean, I agree. I understand. I don't see any space. If anyone out there is watching this on San Carlos television or is out there and comes up with some sort of miracle idea to get bikes from point A to point B, feel free to send us an email.
It's just the nature of bikes. When you get this close into downtown, it becomes a little sticky. And one of the nice things is there's a nice amount of room here for people to walk their bicycles with people walking their bicycles the other direction, because these are much wider sidewalks than we're used to seeing.
Okay. Have you considered a set of steps?
Set of steps?
Yeah.
For a bicycle?
Well, you have that big long stretch down on its back. If you
down
have
here?
a set of steps
no,
right there.
Because we really don't want, the other thing is in the real world, you don't want to, other than this folks internally here, the police department was here, they'd say, absolutely not. We're not going to encourage people coming and going and being in these areas here. They want to, you really want to isolate this to people that have a real reason to be here.
Have you considered, since building 4 must have a flat surface along the side of it, I'm guessing, to the south where those trees are? I know those trees are on a slope. But is there enough room in there to create a small bike path to get people out to the street?
No, well, again, remember, there is you wouldn't want to be going that way, but there's a sidewalk. Again, this is the same issue, that the pinch point here isn't, well, there's a pinch point here, but the pinch point is here. You've got a structure that allows you whatever is there. You're not going to, so underneath, even if you magically created a bike path here, you got to get off the bike to go under here, and then as soon as you turn here, it's really all tight in through here.
But
you really want people, you really don't want, what I suspect people are going to do, they're going to walk their bike here and they're going to walk it across here. And again, they're either going to hop on their bike and they're going to ride whatever direction they're going to ride, or they're going to go there. And the only people that are going to be biking, taking their bike to the transit center, is somebody that is really using the bike at the other end. It's really pointless to take your bike from any of these buildings out of here and because you want to ride to the station where the ramp is just right over here?
Well, no, basically what I did is I took my bike on the train and then I rode it from the train station at 4th and King to my law office. And I think we want to encourage people to do that.
Absolutely.
It's a really nice ride, actually.
Oh, yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. The people that are going to do it, they're taking the bike for the benefit at the other end, not here. And it's not this block, and you're going to have to get off and cross here anyway, or hopefully that's what you're doing, and then you've got another block here, and anyway, it's we're talking about relatively short distances in the scheme of things, and we just don't control the infrastructure out on El Camino. There, it's a bikeway, and these are all bikeways, and people can certainly get on here and do whatever, but we don't control creating a crosswalk in here and to do that when streets don't, one of the challenges is streets over here don't necessarily line up with the streets here, and they've always been discombobulated.
Okay, I've gone through the letter. Those are the issues I wanted to raise from the letter. So
Great.
I cede my time to
Thank
the
you.
gentleman who needs it.
All right, Scott. Oh, wait, really quickly, I'm sorry. Greg, you had an answer to my question about the whether requiring the 15% BMR to be in the project would be a violation of our own BMR ordinance.
Yeah, we, at section 18.16.030, below market rate housing requirements, subsection B talks about residential rental development such as this one, which says, and it reads, for any residential rental development, if an affordable housing impact fee has been adopted, it shall be paid upon the issuance of a building permit for each dwelling unit or addition of 1,000 square feet or more in the residential rental development unless an alternative is approved. And the alternative is the building of below market rate units. So that if the fee is required unless they propose some sort of below market rate.
They would have to propose it.
That's
We
right.
couldn't require it.
That's right.
Got it. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if, seeing as the hour is about almost 9:30, is there a way for the commission to bring out some of the more significant questions so that we can, if we can't get to them tonight, perhaps at the next meeting, we'll be prepared to answer some of those questions. It's been a very informative discussion this evening, and we can still continue that, but I think we would like to get to more questions,
Okay.
if possible.
And so what you're asking then of the commissioners is if they've got top priority questions, particularly if it's questions that staff could use some time to answer, that we ask that of you now. Okay, great. Why don't we go ahead and do that? And then why don't I start with Scott, since we've all had the chance to speak for a bit.
No, he has had plenty of time to speak.
Well, correct. But you get the idea. Keeping in mind that
I was
we do
trying to
want the
address
top
things
priority
while you guys
questions.
were talking about them rather than asking the same questions over again. So I have lots of suggestions, conditions, concerns, and questions. You're asking about sort of
The larger ones.
the larger ones. Well, I have noise issues. I have parking issues. I have landscaping issues. I have traffic issues. And I have a whole list of sort of miscellaneous things here.
Does staff have a preference on how we go through that?
Well, I guess if it was traffic issues that are related to conditions, that would be helpful since we have the Public Works Director with us this evening. So maybe we could start with some of the key, maybe 2 or 3 of the key traffic issues.
Okay.
And then, we can handle them. Again, you can prioritize however you'd like.
And again,
Okay.
remembering that I have a lot of things here that that though I think there's a nexus, I'm sure that the city attorney doesn't. So we've discussed putting those in sort of a bucket list. One of the concerns that I have in traffic is the Holly Street, and it sounds like 100 additional trips in the peak hour is not going to be a lot of trips, but that's really going to affect Holly Street, and that's really going to affect El Camino, and this sort of gets back to the EIR and the fact that while this group here essentially said that we didn't necessarily agree with the things in the EIR, we passed it because we felt that things had been studied. And so a lot of the things that I have here are sort of going back to some of the concerns that were that were not addressed as part of the EIR.
But that do have a nexus.
That do have a nexus. And so, you know, I look at one of the concerns is that we could potentially have 100+ vehicles headed north on El Camino and making a U-turn at Oak Street. And to me, that just seems like either they're going to make a U-turn at Oak Street or they're going to go up into that neighborhood and try and get south, or that's going to create some traffic conditions that may be unacceptable to the community. And so I'd like to hear a little bit from the Public Works Director on how or if there are plans to address that concern.
Well, I guess I'll start out by saying that since that's the first time I've heard that as a concern, I'll say that we don't have any plans to address that concern. There will be left turns that will be made and U-turns that will be made at that intersection. There will also be folks who will go up to the signal at Hull because it may be, they may consider it to be safer to make a protected move at that location. But it's hard to estimate how many people would actually be going out into the neighborhood to try to make a circuitous route back towards San Carlos Avenue, for example, and then back down to El Camino. It's pretty hard to estimate that at this point in time. So I'm not sure, except that we would expect to be some trips and some turns made that way, and we would have to be ready to address those after the project was complete.
So how would you go about addressing those if there is a problem?
It's possible that we could end up with, say, a traffic calming device, perhaps. If we wanted to prevent cut-through traffic, we could use something like a speed hump in the middle of that block where folks would not readily want to go down that path, and it would discourage them from doing that.
Is there a way to make that U-turn at Oak Street safer?
The only way to make it safer would be as if you were to be able to signalize that location to give it a protected phase. But short of that, the only way that they'll be able to do it is wait for a break in that oncoming traffic.
Concerns about Hawley Street? I know that there was a plan to that it's actually gone back to the Traffic and Circulation Commission to look at Hawley Street again, because there are issues on Hawley Street already. Additional traffic from this project is going to have an impact on that. Traffic from the Wheeler Plaza is going to have an impact on that, should that ever be built. It seems like we're pushing traffic onto Hawley, but Hawley becomes a single lane on the west of El Camino. And as we push more traffic into the city, and it just seems to me that intersection becomes less safe and that Hawley Street as a whole becomes more congested.
True on a number of the statements that you just made. What we've done in the development of the US 101 Hawley Street Interchange project is we've had the consultant doing some traffic analysis for us to kind of verify some of the work that had been done over the last several years. And what we're finding is that there is the traffic analysis and the projections are showing that there will be increased traffic at El Camino and Hawley. And so one of the things that we're having them do, and as we went to the Transportation Commission this last month and then visited with the City Council earlier this month, we talked to them about the idea that we should be looking at some options for Holly Street, the corridor between Industrial and Old County, and looking at some options to expand and reconfigure the intersection with El Camino Real. And doing that in conjunction with the Transit Village development and knowing what's going to be happening on the frontages through there, we will be returning to council with some options that we think will help alleviate traffic in the future. Because there are a number of projects which will continue to add to the congestion in the corridor and up to El Camino.
And Jay, when do you think you'll be returning to council with those options?
The schedule has us coming back in January with a discussion of some preliminary alternatives for what we feel could be good improvements that could be made in the corridor as well as the intersection at El Camino.
Thank you.
Do you foresee any problems on El Camino with a right-hand turn onto Holly Street now that the right turn lanes have been shrunk down from 2 lanes to 1 lane?
The consultant that we have has come up with a configuration to allow that to become more of a free right turn that is less controlled by the signal, which we think will help us to get some better throughput in there. So that's one of the ideas that we've come up with and we feel like would be a good implementation.
And doesn't that interfere with the pedestrian traffic from the north?
It would be phased, so you would. That's why I say it would be somewhat of a free right turn. It's not going to be completely free because we know we have to cross pedestrians there. And in fact, it creates an opportunity, and I stand corrected from earlier, to be able to create a little island. It won't be in the very center, but it'll probably be where that right turn lane comes around.
Okay, that's sort of where I was anticipating, and not necessarily the center, but where that divider is right now. Okay. Truck routes. It sounds like in all of these things that you're looking at for Holly Street, one of the concerns that has been expressed is that we use Holly Street routinely as a truck route and dirt hauling route, except that it's a residential neighborhood. And so how do we go about making Holly not the dirt hauling permit and a truck route? And maybe that's one of these things that becomes a bucket item, but each time a project comes through, I am going to suggest an alternative dirt hauling route that does not go down Holly Street, because the idea of dirt hauling routes is to avoid going down residential streets as much as possible and to use the arterials. And I know Holly Street is sort of thought of as an arterial, but it's also a residential neighborhood. So I'll sort of leave that as just a comment.
I think a good bucket list.
A bucket list. Okay. You just talked about the pedestrian island. The last one I have under traffic is simply, I don't even know how to get to this. So lowering the speed limit on Old County Road. And
what does that have to do with this project?
Well, because as you change things out as you have more traffic on El Camino, you encourage people to move over to Old County Road. So as you have more traffic congestion on El Camino, people look for alternative ways to go. And you actually have a parallel road that has fewer stop signs, fewer lights, that actually travels the exact same distance that El Camino does.
So your concern is that this project creates more traffic on El Camino, therefore will create spillover onto Old County?
Absolutely. Okay. And so, and again, maybe this is an item for the bucket list, but my suggestion is to find a way to lower the speed limit on Old County Road that was supposed to be done as part of the East Side Connect project. Another suggestion there is to potentially put stop signs on Old County Road at Terminal and Taylor.
Well, one of the things that will occur with the East Side Connect project is we do have narrowing of the lanes. And so that, essentially, that kind of side friction that we'll be experiencing will likely lower the kind of the prevailing speed out there. We really can't arbitrarily just decide to lower that speed because Old County Road is one of those arterial streets that we have that are governed by the kind of the laws of engineering and traffic surveys. And so it is something which is governed by the speeds there, and the speed limits are set based on the prevailing speed of traffic. But I do have a sense that that narrowing of the roadway will probably result in somewhat slower speeds along Old County.
Okay, and I have the actual engineering and traffic study in front of me that describes Old County Road as a commercial and industrial area. It actually is the only street in San Carlos that has residential facing it that has a speed limit over 30 miles per hour.
Crestview Drive would be another street that has
35
residential
miles
facing. 35
per hour?
miles per hour, yes.
Okay. I didn't realize that Crestview actually had 35 miles an hour.
Correction, I don't think Crestview is 35, but it was very close to the point system.
So it
I
is
might be mistaken
only-
on that. But the other point I
Possible
wanted
to
to
drive
make,
slower than 35 on Crestview going down?
it is with good heavy brake usage.
Okay.
But the other point that I think is that the speed limits in San Carlos on all the streets, including Old County, Crestview, Britton, Alameda, are all set by ordinance. And they're not part of the Planning Commission's purview to set the speed limits. You're not even a recommending body on that. And the speed limits are not something that's a condition of approval on a project.
Okay.
But it's a bucket list item that we can discuss in the context of general planning.
I'm gonna go from there, and I'm gonna go to trees and landscaping.
So Jay can sit.
So thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, sir.
Trying to take care of all the traffic issues. So interestingly enough, when this project first came along,
I'm sorry, Scott. Hold on. David, did you have any additional traffic concerns before we move off that subject?
Oh, no, thanks for asking.
Okay. And then my traffic concern was addressed early on with the in and outs from the driveway. So thank you. Did you have any additional traffic concerns?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Jesse. Go on, Scott.
landscaping. So this is a real tough issue because years ago when we started talking, and I started talking to even Brian Fitzpatrick about landscaping, we talked about potentially 5 layers of landscaping, and one on the east side of Old County, one on the west side of Old County, one on the east side of the berm, one on the west side of the berm, and one on up against the project itself. And over time, the idea was essentially an urban forest where the neighborhood wouldn't even see the project. And so visual quality and height wouldn't even be an issue. And over the years, what's happened is there have been more and more reasons why we can't do pretty much any of these. And so I'm going to start with the east side of Old County. And
The east side of Old County.
east side of Old County.
Okay.
And so here's the plan that the City Council and the Planning Commission got for East Side Connect.
Right.
Okay? And it looks really nice with all the trees and everything, except that at the last Planning Commission meeting, I asked for the actual plans, not just the enlargement plans. If you actually look at the plans, I want you to see that. We'll look at south of Holly here first. This tree, 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 and this tree don't exist. They're not there. There are no trees between Holly Street and Cherry Street that are on the east side.
And quickly, the nexus to this project is because of the extra money.
It's because of the idea that landscaping is going to be sort of that buffer between the project. Okay? So when I look at that, I go, there are no trees along south of Holly. There are actually two trees. There's one south of Cherry, and there's one south of Hall Street. Okay? And so...
Is that something that staff could respond to?
I spent a half hour talking to one of the city engineers this morning about this whole tree issue. When you actually get north of Holly, they show 5 trees between Holly Street and Springfield. None of those trees exist. Okay? And they show 4 trees between Springfield and Sylvan. That's been reduced to 3. And there's 3 trees between Sylvan and Inverness. There's no trees between Inverness and Riverton, and there's 6 or 8 trees north of Northwood, which is essentially out of the residential area. And so when I was looking at this, and so I actually have and requested from staff a copy of the plan for the project. And I met with the engineer this morning. It turns out that the reason they can't plant trees is because of driveways, utilities, and the businesses don't want trees in front of them. And so when I look at that, I also, so we'll just deal with trees at the moment.
It does sound like decent reasons for not putting trees.
Understand.
Right.
But now what you're doing is the idea was to create a layered
forest.
buffer between, and so you've just taken that layer out.
So what you're saying is that
so there's
layer isn't there.
essentially very little, if any, landscaping between the neighborhood
on the
east side of Old County. There is, we've been told as part of East Side Connect that there is no landscaping on the west side of Old County Road.
Well, except for the berm, right?
Well, there was the opportunity as part of this to actually put landscaping in along the roadside there, okay, prior to the berm. Okay? So you could put the same type of trees that you put on the east side on the west side. Then you run up against the berm. And now we're talking about 70 trees up there. And let's see. So I got an email from one of the residents of the city who the whole Freedom of Information Act, which essentially says that, it's from Dimitri. That's going back and forth between Caltrain and the electrification. And one of the lines that says, trees on the right-of-way in an electrified railroad environment are not a good mix. Does PG&E allow trees along their power lines? Same issue for an electrified railroad. Because this area is also one of the key segments for an overtake proposal in the blended system, additional tracks could expand the track footprint from right-of-way line to right-of-way line. Time frame issues need to be considered also.
Who sent this email?
It was actually eventually sent to Brian Fitzpatrick.
So is this something Brian can respond to after you?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm hoping that he will. So electrification will not be in service until about 2019, and the blended system would be after that. Do we want to consider allowing trees until electrification and then have to take them all away?
Brian, is this something you could respond to?
I'm not Brian Fitzpatrick, but I play him on TV. My name is Mark Simon. I'm Executive Officer for Public Affairs. Because there are two different properties involved here, I'm here representing Caltrain, and Brian gets to represent Samtrans. And you can tell because I'm wearing a Caltrain necktie. The issue of electrification and trees on the right-of-way, what we can tell you is that we don't know anything yet. Our best answer is to say that we've been working with the developer, Legacy, and the landowner, Samtrans, regarding their plans to plant additional trees on the JPB-owned property, and we will continue to do so to accommodate these plans as much as we can. It's just not possible to determine that now because we don't know what electrification will look like in terms of the poles we're going to put up and the wires we're going to put up. There are a variety of options. We're preparing an environmental impact report that will look at the worst case scenario, worst case in this case being the most impact on the ability to put trees and so on the right-of-way. We do that so that when the environmental impact report is completed, we can go back from there without having to do a whole new report that addresses those questions. So if you take the worst case scenario, you have room to move back from there. But at this point, we haven't even determined what that worst case scenario is. So the design of the project is only conceptual right now, and nothing definitive can be concluded from it.
And what's your, can you tell me anything about the timeline for the completion?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
Please continue.
I'm pleased that I actually have it written down here. We're looking on the EIR. We expect it to be available. Brian hates it when I get up and talk instead of him. The EIR in the fall of 2014 be available for comment and public input. And so sometime after that is when we would be able to really sit down and discuss in real detail with the city, with the developer, and with Samtrans about exactly what we can and can't do there. We want to put up as many as possible. We want to preserve as many as possible. But to tell you we're going to and give you a number now would just simply be speculative and would be inaccurate, or at least potentially inaccurate. So we'd rather not do that.
The developer wanted to come up and add something if he can, I think.
Yes, please,
Sure.
Jeff. Thank you.
Hoping only to put a little perspective on things. When we submitted the original plan with the AR, we focused on putting a row of trees like this, but with about half that number of trees. I'm going to say there were maybe 20 trees in this area, and there were no trees that existed on this side of the building over here. So as a part of the evolution, we've done, call it, three major things. We have adjusted how we're working these areas, and we've created all these trees, and really the highest sensitivity is in these areas where we're across from residential. All these other areas that we're talking about are all across from commercial buildings, which are a little less sensitive than being across the residential. This has been the area of highest focus and response from the neighborhood, but we added trees throughout behind all these buildings, so we created a layer here. And the other thing is, what we decided in the proposal, if you look at this density, which is something like double what we had originally contemplated, these contemplate trees with, let's say, a 15-foot wide head. And I think the number here is in the range of 30 or so trees that exist here. Part of the idea behind our proposal to fund 70 trees is if there's a greater impact and we're pushed further away from the tracks because of the electrification, the solution to that is trees that are narrower and more columnar in their form factor. And the idea was, well, we could double the number of trees here at a much, we could put, Italian cypress, let's say, that may have a 6, 8 foot instead of a 15-foot diameter, and plant them more densely in a location like this. So that's part of the idea of let's just, while we don't know, let's make sure that we've provided for a much larger number of trees that are contemplated in any of these areas, so we can do trees that are more columnar if that's what's forced on us. And if the fact is that we wind up with trees more like this, then we wind up with a surplus of 30 or 40 trees that we can plant elsewhere. And that the idea is whatever trees aren't needed or don't get here can be planted elsewhere in the East Side neighborhood, and that was part of our proposal, to staff, and it is to the city to do that. But the other important thing is along this edge, in response to this, we dropped, except for these 3 units right here, we dropped the entire back of these buildings to 3 stories. And that was a major part of the view and, line of sight, questions and issues there. So we've attacked this from 2 different directions. We've brought the buildings down where they're substantially, again, except for from here to here, where we have these 3 units right here that are 4 stories. From here to here, it's all 3-story product. And we've added the row of trees here, and we've provided a mechanism to ensure that there's the funding there and the capability to get these 70 trees wherever it works out to get them done.
And Scott, I want to give you a chance to finish your comments on the landscaping. But one thing that did come to mind is because the businesses don't want the trees in, because for East Side Connect, I'm talking specifically on the west side, the east side of Old County, could those trees be planted a little bit further back in the neighborhood, and would that help your urban forest idea?
Who would pay for those trees?
I don't know. I'm thinking
there were
again
trees that the city was going to put into the
again, maybe the
sidewalk.
money that was going to the East Side Connect pictures
But
that we see.
that's not the developer. I'm just looking at this and going.
Well, but the
originally, we
developer
were
has-
talking 5 layers of landscape.
Right.
Now we're really talking 1 that's
Right.
guaranteed.
But the developer has also agreed to 70 trees that could be planted if the berm trees don't get the density we need from electrification, that they can be planted elsewhere in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
And that's what
the
they've
problem
agreed
I have with the berm trees is that they're potentially they're guaranteed for maybe 6 years. Okay, which doesn't even get to the really the
Well, and I think with the berm trees, we've already had a pretty good discussion on being able to extend that timeline. I know that city staff didn't necessarily agree with the number we were reaching, but I think we've all come to a relative consensus to at least push that out to 10.
But
not to put words in anybody's mouth, that's just seemed to be where our
Well,
conversation.
through the chair, if I may just
Yes.
really briefly. First, I just think this conversation has been kind of interesting because I think we may have just found our nexus to increase the length of time. The uncertainty due to electrification would be our nexus, because now we don't know how long those trees are going to be able to stay there, and we can extend the time to make sure that that we can make sure that there are trees for an extended period of time. Something for the city attorney to think about as a potential nexus. But I just, for Scott's purposes, I could tell you that for me in voting, it's going to be much more helpful for me if you say I don't think there are enough trees, or they're not doing what they said they were going to do before. That's not very helpful to me personally. It would be more helpful if you said, I propose we increase the trees in this way, or I propose they do this or that. I propose, for example, on this issue, that they agree to put the trees someplace else in the event that electrification means they have to take them out. Those kinds of things are very helpful to me, in contrast to they're not doing what they say they're doing, because that...
I got it all right here.
And forgive me, Scott, if I...
Trying to set the understanding of why some of these conditions that I'm putting in place, or going to ask to put in place.
Perfect, Scott, continue.
So I'll go on, because I believe that the fourth layer doesn't really exist on the west side of the berm, because they need to leave the land for the 4 tracks. And then the 5th area up against the buildings is really, I say the developer has done what they can do, but again, there's 28 feet between the property line and the building, and most of that is taken up with utilities. So they can only put the few trees that they're putting in there up against the buildings. And then they have limitations with the buildings because they need fire escapes, and so they need access to those. So the whole idea that was originally there of creating this forest between the neighborhood and the development is gone, okay? And so here's sort of the conditions that I would like to see.
Okay.
The first one is to require that all on-site landscaping be in place before occupancy. Okay? So that means the trees in the back of the building, that means the trees along the berm, that means wherever trees are going in. And I agree that they should essentially be trees, that it should be by building. I don't necessarily feel like they need to put everything in at the same time. If they want to put it in all at the same time, because it's simpler and it's more cost effective, I don't have a problem with that. Okay. The next condition is, if landscaping along the rail corridor cannot be guaranteed for the life of the project, we have to do something with the height of those buildings, okay? Because I have when you are standing on Old County Road, you will no longer be able to see building 1, 2, and 3, 4th floors. But as soon as you start moving towards the back of that neighborhood, you will still see the 4th floor of building 1, 2, and 3. So I have a concern with the 4th floor of building 1, 2, and 3. On the flip side, I also have a concern with the 3rd floor of building 8. It's 50 feet, and the developer has offered to put 2 trees in there, and if I remember correctly, the building length is 175 feet. And so that's a condition that I would like to see put in there. We can have a discussion about that.
I'm sorry, what's the condition?
That if the landscaping along the rail corridor cannot be guaranteed for the life of the project, then the project will be limited to 3 floors for building 1 and 2, 3, and 2 floors for building 8.
And what was your next condition, Scott?
An additional 40 trees, total 20 on each side, for screening to both sides of the berm east of building 8.
I'm sorry, say that again. 40 trees, both sides.
20 on each side for screening to both sides of the berm east of building 8.
Uh-huh.
All on-site landscaping, including irrigation, shall be maintained for the life of the project.
On-site?
Yes, on-site, by the developer or Samtrans. All off-site landscaping, including irrigation, needs to be maintained by somebody for the life of the project, whether it's the developer, whether it's Samtrans. You know, we talked about that a little bit earlier in figuring out exactly who did that.
Mm-hmm.
All off-site trees shall be planted before the construction starts, if possible. The developer is planning on setting up a fund for the developer needs to set up a fund for maintenance of the trees once the city takes over responsibility. We still expect dead trees to be replaced within 90 days. Let's see. Locate the landscaping on the east side of the buildings in front of windows and balconies to the greatest extent possible. I realize that there is a fire hazard, but as much as possible, those should be located in front of the windows. I still have a problem with why there's no landscaping in this 28-foot wide locale between the buildings and the right-of-way. It's been explained to me that there's utilities there, but I got to wonder, are there utilities in the whole 28 feet there? And why can't there be a second layer of landscaping in that region?
Are you talking about right in the middle there?
Yeah, I'm talking on the east side of the building.
Okay.
Okay. I recognize the pads where the fire trucks will need to park or back up and go around. But I can't believe that there's 28 feet wide utilities in there.
I'm not sure where are you, could you give me, like, east of which building?
East of building 1, 2, 3, and 4. The whole back of those buildings. There's 28 feet from the building to the right of way. And yet there's one set of trees that's right up against the building and nothing in the back there.
Madam Chair, I think we can probably have the architect or developer answer that. We did work very closely with the fire department in terms of the access requirements that they had. But Sherry Scott is here. Maybe she can add some information.
Perfect. Thank you, Sherry.
Sure. Just to kind of refresh why we didn't have trees back here in the first place, which was that originally this whole lane back here was for emergency vehicle access, right? And so essentially these hammerhead turnarounds that are for the fire trucks, we didn't have hammerheads before. It was a drive-through all the way around the project, and so this full width was all.
So those are turnarounds for the fire trucks?
So now what we did was we had a meeting with the fire department to see if there was any other way we could reduce the amount of paving for fire trucks and increase our planting area. So what we came up with the fire department are these two hammerheads that you see paved here. So a fire truck no longer can drive through here and out. They would actually have to come in, back up, and do a T-turn and out. And this is a standard maneuver for a fire truck. But it really opened up these areas behind the buildings here for planting. Now, the second part of that is that just because the fire trucks stop with these turnarounds, they still have to pull hoses and ladders through these spaces. Okay. And so they have to get to bedroom windows. And so that's their job is life safety, and as designing the buildings, we're held to those building code standards. So essentially, even though the fire truck comes in here and turns around and comes out, there are emergency personnel and ladders being hauled through this area. And so that was as far as we could get the concession from the fire department to get the planning that we do have and still have access for the firefighters.
And so there's no way to put any landscaping on the back of that strip.
No. I mean, not any more than we've already shown.
I'm not talking about the back of the building. I'm talking on the other side of the strip. Still leave them access to be able to get hoses and ladders in there, but nothing against the back of that strip.
You're talking about on the berm? Sorry, I'm losing my arrow.
I'm talking
in the white area.
Yes, not on the berm, but in that back part of that.
Where the sidewalk is shown.
That's a sidewalk?
Right.
Okay.
There's a sidewalk, there's low planting, and then there's trees.
Couldn't you have the bike path in between two rows of trees, and the same for the ladder and hoses?
Well, and a lot of this too is there are utilities there. There's an existing fiber optic line that runs right along this property line here, and that basically is right at the toe of the slope. And without cutting off communication to half of the peninsula, we cannot move that line.
Please don't do that.
No. So that's factor one. There's also there's other utilities back there as well. It's really is a puzzle to get as many of the trees back here as we could. And so our meeting with the fire department really was the best attempt that we could do to maximize planning. And what we're showing is it's the best effort over years of haggling with various agencies to try to get as many trees in there as we could.
Sorry, Jeff. Get on up to that mic.
Those are very large trees. They may look small here by comparison to these, but these are enormous trees that exist here. These are very, very large street trees that are 50 feet in 40, 50 feet in diameter at full growth. So these are high-quality trees. We did a lot of work in, if you came to any of the public sessions, and maybe that's what Sherry needs to do some more of, is bring back the stuff that we've done a number of times when we did the study session to show what those trees look like there and how much they did break up those buildings.
Thank you. Scott, any other additional conditions you want us to entertain?
Yes, I'd like to amend the street tree neighborhood improvement fund to a much higher level than $25,000 for trees that are not planted on the berm. A number of 100,000 has been thrown out in the past. I don't think that that's unreasonable if you're going to essentially tell everybody that you can't put trees in there. And that the berm trees are not guaranteed. So the other condition, and the last one that I have, actually there's one more after that, is to require the Joint Powers Board to sign an agreement to work to keep all the landscaping in place, or to agree to pay for the cost of relocating the landscape that's on the berm, or replanting new landscaping in the neighborhood if San Carlos becomes the location of the 4-track alternative due to electrification or high-speed rail. Because it has been suggested that if either electrification or high-speed rail or something comes along, none of these trees are guaranteed. They could all disappear one day.
Can we require such a thing of the JPB? Or maybe request it if we can't require it?
My inclination is the JPB is not an applicant here, that it's Samtrans is the owner of the property and the developer is the proponent of the project. So I may not be getting all of your question, or can you read the condition again for me, Scott?
So essentially, if these trees cannot be guaranteed, then how do we even consider them?
Guaranteed, you mean as far as maintaining them or being planted in the first place?
As being there for any length of time. I mean, essentially, you've said we've heard Mark Simon speak and say that he doesn't even know the conditions under which electrification would allow trees or not. So in 6 years, they may come along and say, and that's essentially what this letter was saying, was that essentially trees and electrification don't mix, okay? Yet we're forcing a series of as many as 70 trees in this location. If that's the case, then, how do we attempt to try and keep these trees?
That I can talk about.
I think there are some conditions that talk about agreements with Samtrans for the maintenance of the trees. But I think one of the things that we've been grappling with this project is that there's two other agencies, there's the JPB and High Speed Rail,
right,
that might influence what actually goes in there. And the city of San Carlos, for example, if High Speed Rail, despite the governor's recent signing of the bill that limits the Caltrain corridor to a 2-track alternative, or a future governor were to change their mind and decide for a much bigger project, the city really couldn't stop the project except on the environmental side of it. They could take property, they could force the removal of trees for their project. All they have to do is make a finding that it's a superior use than what's there, and we wouldn't be able to stop it on that basis. So that's part of the problem we're grappling with in crafting a condition that would guarantee something forever, because we just don't have the ability to guarantee something forever. What we do have the ability to is to put well-crafted conditions in here to deal with the current situation with the Caltrain corridor, with the property, to mitigate some of the effects. And some of the landscaping is CEQA-based. It's conditions of approval, it's mitigations. Some of it's going to be conditions of approval-based. Some of it's going to be addressed, and those will be addressed through agreements with Samtrans and the developer. So agreements could include provisions to require replacement, or you address the issue of is the alternative fund that might fund trees in the neighborhood to help mitigate. Those are some of the issues that we've tried to incorporate into the conditions of approval.
And that we can discuss and debate. Okay, great.
Okay, one last one, and that is, I have yet to see a landscaping plan for south of Arroyo. Essentially, what I've seen is the amount of $600,000, which would be used for sidewalks, curbs, and street trees, but nothing that actually covers the vacant area between the trees and the sidewalk and the berm.
I think
And
Mr.
so-
Simon may have wanted to respond to something prior.
Yes.
I just hope it will provide some clarification, although in my case, I'm never 100% sure. We are committed to, I talked about the worst-case scenario with the placement of the poles and the overhead wires and the infrastructure for electrification. We are committed to pursuing flexibility in the placement of those poles. The worst-case scenario is just going to, they have to be 200 feet apart. We're going to start somewhere and just boom, 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 but they don't actually have to be that way if they're in the wrong place or they're going to have a negative impact and can be mitigated by placing them somewhat differently. So we're committed to doing that. So any number of positive options may be possible. We just don't know what they are yet.
Right.
All we know for sure is that when we publish the EIR, the worst possible option is the one that you're going to see. But let me just reassure you to the extent I can, there will be trees. We simply can't tell you at this time how many or where they're going to be, but there'll be trees. We don't want to, denude this strip of land. And we can commit to sitting down with the city and the developer and the designer to work out specific locations, numbers, and types of trees. It's just something we have to do after the fall of 2014, which is when we told you we'd really be looking at the EIR in more detail. I hope that helps.
So would you be willing to sign an agreement that would take place?
That what will take place?
That you would sit down and find locations for those trees, and if those trees are not planted there, then the money would be put into the neighborhood fund.
I can't commit the agency to spending money along the lines you're describing. Not now. We'd have to have a
No,
discussion.
I'm not
about
asking you to.
that. You just asked me if I'd
spend
sign an agreement to committing to do that, and I can't.
to come in and look for the best location for those
Absolutely.
trees.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's the piece, and then the developer would put any additional money for those trees that's not going to be used, that we can't find a location for on the berm, into the neighborhood fund.
Well, that's an issue for
Right.
somebody.
I'm not asking you
someone
to,
else.
to do that, but that's a piece of this
Sure.
project
Yes.
already.
No, that's why we're standing here making the commitment now. There'd be no
Okay.
reason not to follow it up with something in writing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Quickly, I just wanted to, since I noticed we got 15 minutes left, just, I'm also interested in a little bit more information on South of Arroyo. It is one of the things I had on my list also. So if there is any additional plan that can be shown for what South of Arroyo will look like, that would be helpful. But at this point, what I wanted to do is ask if the other commissioners have any important questions or comments that they want to give to staff so that staff can be ready to respond to it at the next meeting. Jesse?
I actually have a question for the developer, Jeff.
Sorry, Jeff.
And the reason why I was asking the questions about transit center parking, because one of the conditions in there is that, I think it's building 5, 6, 7, and 8 can't start until transit center is, I think it's significantly built out, I think is what it said. My only concern about that is that, to me, that's a big element to the community. The building 7, 8, 5, 6, the plaza, And I noticed that you guys we're going to be parcelizing some of these things, and we might end up with multiple owners of this really, and it might have to be done in phases. So would you guys be okay with making that phase one?
No.
Okay. No, you wouldn't.
No, we would not be okay with that.
Okay.
I mean, we've been 9 years, and as importantly as we wouldn't be comfortable with it, Caltrain, Samtrans wouldn't be comfortable with either. Our lease requires us to get going as soon as we can get it entitled and pull building permits. This area to the north is available. So we would go out and we get a financing commitment to do that, and we'd start building as soon as we can. And the fact that we're building, gets them building. So the phasing process will be, we will take what land is available as soon as it's available to build it, and they need to complete a functional center before they can release this other land to the south.
So how do you
to us.
see the phasing happening right now then?
I see the phasing happening. We could start at Holly on the north side and work our way north, or from the further south working our way that direction. That's not clear to me yet, because we just have to see what the contractors suggest is the best method is. Where's the best place to leave yourself last? You work yourself out of space. Do we start there? But it'll be to the south end as soon as they get the transit center complete, then we can break ground in those other areas.
Does that answer your question, Jesse?
Well, yeah, you answered. You said no.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not.
I didn't know if you had
It's just
follow-up or
not
anything
helpful or
else.
practical, because it then puts off the start of the project for another 18 months or something.
let me
and
throw a
we
hypothetical.
have much greater possibility we get into the next recession by doing that.
Well-
The key to this is, as soon as this thing gets entitled and we can get through design review and we start working on working drawings, we get a financial commitment, and we get going, because months make huge differences. I mean, we had a project that we worked really hard to get financed, and we had a financial commitment. We were having final meetings with lenders, a whole group of lenders on a project in San Jose that were supposed to be here on 9/12/01, and we managed to get that deal done. But had things been such that was 2 months later, and the real ramifications of 9/12 had been there, our financial partner would have been gone, that had been gone, and it would have been 5 years later. Would it have ever happened? We don't know. We just can't take those kinds of risks. It's too, we got to get going as soon as we can get going.
No, I understand that part, but then kind of a follow-up to that is what prevents you from from building 1 to 4 and not ever going to 5, 6, 7, and 8?
Financial pressures in the world could do that to us. I mean, we're going to start where we're going to start. We'll go out and seek a financing commitment for the whole project. But if we get going there and something happens and they get stalled or something happens, we can't prevent what doesn't happen. Now, what happens is our entitlements might lapse, and so we have a gun to our head. Our entitlements have a finite period of time. We need to get going and get it done. So otherwise, we're back here like PAMF was, asking for extensions to that. We've spent a lot of money and resources in 10 years. We didn't do that to not get the thing built. And the other thing is, from a investment perspective, yes, we love to be building that is phase 1. I mean, that's the crown jewel. That's the part closest to downtown. That's the sexiest part of it. And if we could, we would, but it's just not practical. We lose 18 months in that process, and that's very, very risky and puts the whole project in jeopardy. And Caltrans takes that risk too. Or Samtrans in that lease that they're going and committing and building that, and we can't get started till after they're done. They're waiting a long time to see lease money. The city's waiting a long time to see fees and things paid and things like that.
But then it wouldn't be a transit village if you couldn't develop that phase, right? I mean, it basically would be housing along.
Just like PAMF, we cannot control what the economy is at the time that this gets approved. I mean, something could happen next month. We could have the next financial meltdown next month. If that happens, I can't predict what happens. We need to get this thing financed and going as soon as possible. I mean, take advantage of the fact that the financial markets and, market for financing apartments are as good as they've been in the last, 6 or 7 years, but that, I cannot promise you that that won't change. And when we were, the economy goes in cycles, and again, PAMF is a perfect example. It got put off several years. It's getting built. And a location like this, we're going to get it built. I just can't tell you with absolute, he said, with absolute certainty that, something isn't going to happen. That you prove this, and the next month we don't go into the next financial meltdown and we get put off. But that puts us in worse shape than you are, because we've got millions of dollars invested in this. We'll be putting millions of dollars in working drawings and paying permit fees and things like that. And when we get in and start doing this and start paying all these fees and do these things, this thing makes financial sense by building it all out. We're really hurt by only building a portion of it.
I think that's pretty well understood. I think that's a good explanation. Do you have any follow-up questions on that line of train of thought, Jesse?
Oh, yes, and I don't know how to do that, but part of the whole plan is our primary leasing facility is, how do I do this? How do I back up pages?
Different slide.
There you go.
Primary leasing facility is right here. So we will be able to put ourselves what I'll call we'll locate somewhere down here. We haven't determined exactly where. We will locate, as part of maybe some common facilities, what I'll call a small initial lease-up office. But this isn't really where you want to be leasing this project from. Again, this is where the vibe is. This is what we're selling. I mean, we're going to be leasing every unit out of this location. People coming in here, feeling this whole thing, and doing that. This is the sexy part of it that gets us the rents that help pay for this thing.
Thank you. That's a good question. Thank you. David, did you have any other questions to help direct staff? Scott, do you have any other anything we can wrap up in the next 5 minutes, or anything you want to throw to staff?
I want to throw
to get them ready for the next
one thing to staff. And one of the things that we discussed as part of the Railroad Land Use Steering Committee was the creation of a quiet zone designation in San Carlos along the rail corridor. And because that was a discussion that we had concerning noise, and I know staff and I have a disagreement on whether noise is a significant issue or not, or whether it's even an issue at all for them. And one of the biggest issues with noise are those horns. And so I would like to see us explore again the creation of that quiet zone designation in San Carlos, in which you're not allowed to blow your horns on the train tracks in San Carlos.
But that wouldn't necessarily have a nexus to this project, or something that we could require from the developer, would it? Am I wrong?
It's an increase in the noise because the noise is bouncing off the buildings.
I see.
Okay? Now, we have a disagreement in the fact that the noise is already there from
It already exists.
It already exists from the whistles, but there is a potential increase in noise from it bouncing off the things. So to me, that's where my nexus
That's where you
is,
see it. Okay.
is from that. We haven't had an accident on the rail corridor in San Carlos since the tracks have been raised, and yet we still have those horns, and they can be as loud as 95, 98 decibels.
Is that because I think that's a good point. I just don't know that it's necessarily has the legal nexus to this project. Is that something we can put in something else? Revisiting a quiet zone?
I think the most we could look into it a little bit further before the next meeting. But the real issue is that there's another governmental agency that's going to make the determination on whether we qualify for a quiet zone, and we have a couple of other agencies who are running a railroad. There's a private railroad, Union Pacific, that has a right to operate on this corridor. So it's sort of outside of a decision that we can make. It's I don't know how we could impose that type of a condition. We could ask the developer to study the issue or something along those lines as a condition, I would think, because that might tie to some of the issues that you're addressing there. But
It's already been brought up once, and the issue was that the requirement was that the city would have to take liability for any accidents along the rail corridor, because we were essentially asking them to not use the horns. And so the issue is not whether it can be done or not. The issue is who's going to take responsibility for the liability.
I wasn't aware, and I may be mistaken, and I wasn't aware that it had gotten that far, but I think I do recall that would be something that Union Pacific and perhaps Caltrain would have wanted the city to indemnify them and hold them harmless if there were an accident related to the quiet zone.
I think it's something we need to explore as a way to deal with the noise.
I don't. I'll just say right now, I don't. So I don't know whether there are 3 votes that want to explore that. I mean, I don't know if we take a preliminary vote, but I just do not. I do not see this as being an issue that is closely related to this project.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't.
I do see it as being an important issue, but I don't necessarily see the nexus to this project. But I would like to see the whistles be quiet, in all honesty. I can
As
hear
would
them in
I.
Alameda.
As would
So-
I. I can hear them in my house, and I'm the farthest house in San
Right.
Carlos from that location. I can hear them. They're loud. I know.
Right.
But
I
I
think it's
just
safe to say that almost everybody in San Carlos can hear the 2 a.m. Union Pacific train coming north or south through the area, but it's still just an issue of.
Can we put that in the bucket list instead then?
It's something that's definitely a policy question, and it is a city council policy question, but it's also a question that's worth studying. I mean, other cities on the peninsula have actually been looking at it too. So.
Okay. Anything else to help direct staff for the next meeting? We've got a couple minutes. Well, at this point, I'll mention just a couple of things. Again, south of Arroyo and the South Corridor was something that Scott mentioned. I'd like to see a little bit more on for the next meeting. I know that we've already started discussion about the shuttles moving, so I assume the commission will discuss that in a condition a little bit more. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, but I assume we'll be talking about it. I know that there's a staff recommendation around Building 3, so and I understand that we'll probably dive in more building by building from some of the recommendations that staff had in the report, and we didn't really have a chance to do that at this point. Beyond that, is there anything else that you guys would like staff to look at before we come back?
Not for me.
Anything
No,
else?
I think there's other things to talk about,
Sure.
but we don't. Nothing, I think, that requires staff to go out and do some research.
Okay.
So,
great.
Madam Chair, I think what we'll do is we'll start on the bucket list and we'll start the list and we'll deliver that to you at the next meeting. And we'll be prepared to answer some of the questions that came up and bring forward more information as requested.
Great. Thank you very much, Al. Okay.
So
Well,
do we need a motion to continue the matter to another date uncertain?
Date certain.
Date certain.
Yeah.
So
It's
does someone have a
scheduled for-
recommendation on a
it's-
date?
It's scheduled for
October
next
7th.
Monday, the 7th,
Yep.
just in case.
So I would love to entertain that motion.
I regretfully and with great reservation move to continue this matter to October 7th.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay, great. We'll continue the discussion for October 7th. And thank you all very much. And then can we go ahead and go on to item 7, reports, correspondence, and general information. Report on recent city council actions.
No,
I'm sorry, did I hear no?
nothing this evening, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Al. Planning Commission comments or reports?
I don't print out those. I just.
In my role as an attorney for the county, I've been involved in a
county redistricting process, and I'm only in a professional capacity, but folks in San Carlos may be interested that there's a redistricting plan that's been proposed that splits San Carlos, putting East San Carlos in one district and the rest of San Carlos in another district. That's going to go before the Board of Supervisors on October the, is that 8th, the Tuesday? Yeah, October the 8th. I think folks might be interested in that. I don't take a position on it one way or another because I work on it in a professional capacity, but I think folks should be aware of that.
And this is for the county,
What level
right?
of redistricting?
What's that?
Is it redistricting at the county level?
At the county level.
County level.
The Board of Supervisors districts.
That's right.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other planning commissioner reports or comments? Okay, great. Any correspondence we had on the dais? Any additional correspondence?
No.
Thanks, Lisa. And any planning staff comments, reports, and updates of current projects?
Yes, there are a couple items, Madam Chair. For the next meeting, your regular calendar meeting, October the 7th, the only item that we have on the agenda is the Transit Village, but we do have a couple of other items that are in the queue to come before the Commission on October 21st. One is an amendment to the sign ordinance. Another is modification to an existing Sprint wireless facility at 260 Shelford. And then the likely third project to be brought forward is continuation of the project that the Commission previously heard for 934 Laurel. That's the 3-unit mixed-use project that will come back most likely on October 21st.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to go ahead and...
Another long meeting.
So, well, that's for the 21st. All right. I adjourn this meeting at whatever time it is.
10:33.
10:33. Thanks, everyone.